3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. You are, I hope you've worked out by now, listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm afraid I didn't watch Question Time last night. I don't know what the figures are. I presume quite a lot of people currently listening to this programme didn't watch Question Time last night either. But I'm drawn to a couple of things from these conversations between the leaders. I'm also, as you know, drawn every morning to your messages, particularly the ones that arrive before I've set my stall out. For example, JP says, James, you have to discuss Question Time from last night and how angry Rishi Sunak was with every question. The disdain towards the public was uncomfortable to watch. I've tracked this a bit, and he's a very angry man, isn't he? There's an air, a sense that he can't quite believe people aren't doing what he wants them to do. It's almost as if he sort of expects to get a biscuit every time he opens his mouth, like a child. He's like a petulant child, a sort of angry, spoilt child. And I didn't think this at the beginning of the campaign. I have to be honest with you. I had plenty of criticisms of him, but that wasn't one of them. But as it goes on, the more he is exposed to the public, the worse I think he looks. And never more so. In fact, quite a few of you picking up on this. Lawrence writes, did you notice how over it Rishi Sunak appeared? That's a dead man behind those eyes. Johnny in Hove says, wasn't Sunak vile last night? He was abusive towards that young girl at the end. I didn't see it. I was busy. I was doing something at the O2. But I am drawn to one particular comment, which I think speaks volumes of what I'm nudging you towards early doors this morning. I also realised that the national service thing was announced when I was off. I said, Lewis Goodall steered you through the national service conversations, because I don't know whether you ever have this. It's sort of in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, I don't think I ever got stuck into that. Why did I never get stuck into that? That's got you and me written all over it. That's a sort of like, if you programmed an algorithm to come up with a story that we would enjoy talking about together, Rishi Sunak bringing back national service would be a contender for the number one spot. Admittedly, it would be pushed into second place by deciding to come back from D-Day commemorations earlier, but still it would be a contender for the number one spot. So I went back to... I checked my calendar. I actually checked my diary to work out why it had happened. And it was announced on a Friday after I'd come off air, I think. So I never really got the chance to get stuck into it. So we can rectify that a bit today, because he's tried to reanimate the ghost of the national service debacle.
You'll have a set of sanctions and incentives, and we will look at the models that are existing around Europe to get the appropriate mix of those. There's a range of different options that exist.
For example?
There's all sorts of things that people do across Europe, whether that's looking at driving licenses, other access to finance, all sorts of other things. The right thing to do is to allow...
Access to finance?
Yes.
So if people don't want to do national service, what, you're going to take their bank cards away?
No, there's access. there's lots of different models around Europe. There's lots of different models around Europe. This is being done in multiple countries in Europe.
I don't doubt it. I'm just asking you what you think.
So there's a range of things, and we will have a Royal Commission look at all of those, come back to the government and recommend what the appropriate mix of incentives and sanctions is.
Sanctions? So I've tried to follow this story. I followed it from when it sounded as if every 18-year-old in the country was going to have to spend a year playing soldiers. And then I think it swerved a little bit into it won't be compulsory, or it won't be for very long. It will be compulsory. It won't be for... No, it won't be. So we had it won't be compulsory, didn't we? So and then it will be compulsory, but it won't be for a year. How many iterations is that of the policy? I don't know why I've got my finger. I'm trying to count on my fingers, but they've gone a bit out of control. So let me start again. So we'll have every 18-year-old in the country will have to play soldiers for a year. Number one. Then it won't be compulsory, number two, and then it won't be for a year, number three. And now today we find ourselves examining the possibility that young people will be sanctioned if they don't join in, which means it will be sort of semi-compulsory, doesn't it? Is that what it means? It will be semi-compulsory? So you'll be sanctioned if you don't do it, but you won't be sent to jail. It's not going to be like national service in Israel or something like that. You won't be sent to jail if you don't join in, like that amazing young woman we spoke to a couple of months ago. What's going on? What's the mindset here that allows Rishi Sunak to come up with a scheme like this and to think that it's a good idea? What I want you to do is a slightly more challenging task than usual. What I want you to do is to try to work out what he is appealing to. And I say what he is appealing to rather than who, because it's a more nuanced inquiry that way. What is he appealing to? So if I say who, then you can just say gammon or something like that. But if I say what is he trying to appeal to here? Do you know what I was thinking of this morning as I made my way down the stairs? I was thinking of that line that we have stumbled across so many times together, sometimes unexpectedly. And that line is, which has become one of those phrases that jumps from the show and assumes a life of its own. Do you know which phrase I'm talking about? Out of all the sort of phrases that can suffer a little bit from stuck needle syndrome on this programme, I don't mean you. That phrase, which I think first appeared when we were talking about Brexit with people born overseas whose own family had voted for Brexit in order to get rid of the immigrants. And you'd turn to your mother-in-law and you'd say, but I'm one of those people. And they'd say, no, I don't mean you. I don't mean you. I mean all the other ones, the ones that Farage talks about, not the actual real people who I know, the ones in the posters and the Daily Mail editorials. I don't mean you. But the problem is, with a blunt instrument, that it does mean you. So I found myself thinking, there's something else I've picked up on recently, is this demonization of young people. Sometimes it's quite an ugly politicized attempt to portray them all as criminals or gangsters. It's gone on through the ages. The demonization of the younger generation by the older generation is as old as anything. But it's particularly pungent at the moment because it adds to the divisions between the generations, when the generation that really has lost out the most is the youngest generation. The Daily Telegraph article that said they should all do national service as a way of saying thank you for the furlough. Even by the standards of the unhinged headline feature that we enjoy enormously on this programme, I must try and do one today. When you've got people writing for the Daily Telegraph about why young people must do national service to say thank you for the furlough scheme, which didn't help them at all directly. Indeed, much of the COVID policy called upon young people to endure privations in order to keep the older generation alive. But what is it appealing to? The idea that young people might face restrictions on access to finance. I presume that means loans of some kind. You can understand Fiona Bruce's confusion when she said, what do you mean? Do you mean they'll have their bank cards taken away? I presume it just means access to loans or some sort of preferential financial scheme. Or driving licenses. They could have restrictions on their driving licenses if they refuse to do national service. Now, I have a tendency, as you know, to overthink these things. And it first came to the fore during COVID. Do you remember how many times at the beginning of the COVID catastrophe we found ourselves wondering what the secret master plan was? Wondering whether it was sinister or not. We couldn't quite work out what the plan was. We found it together. Well, maybe you didn't, but I certainly found it very, very hard to believe that they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, looking back, that makes me incredibly naive, doesn't it? If you think about, I've written a whole book about the creation of the ecosystem in which this incompetence could flourish. But at the time, when it started, I couldn't quite believe that you could become prime minister or you could become the most senior advisor, unelected bureaucrat in the country and not have a clue what you were doing or be too busy arguing with your boss's wife to get a grip on the national catastrophe. So I always thought that there might be some sort of 3D chess going on. I love that phrase. Like, there'd be some sort of 3D chess going on that you and I, lesser mortals like you and me, were not able to discern. You know, they wouldn't let you know. They wouldn't tell the people in the cheap seats what was going on backstage, would they? And as it progressed and as more detail emerged and continues to, you realise not only were they making it up as they were going along, in a lot of cases, but they were also sorting their mates out with contracts on a scale that would make Donald Trump's eyes water. I suffer from the same condition here a bit. I sort of think Sunak must have in his mind a rationale for this. To me, it is pant-wettingly stupid and actually quite offensive, this suggestion. But I am only one person, and he is Prime Minister. He has a phalanx of advisors, an army of pollsters. He has access to the findings of countless focus groups. So I can't help thinking that they're all sitting around a big table with a clear picture of why this is a good idea, why it is not only a good idea to introduce compulsory national service for all 18-year-olds, but also to take away the driving licenses or damage the financial status of any young people who refuse to join in. I'm thinking this must be designed to appeal to something. They must think that this presses some buttons. And my question for you this hour is what buttons? Because the other bit, the bit where I mention, I don't mean you, is that how can anybody think this is a good idea for their own children? I can see how you might think it would work for your own grandchildren, but that's because you think your own children are doing a really bad job of parenting your grandchildren. Nobody's going to sit here and think, well, I can't teach my children the importance of hard work or values or ethics, so I think that some randoms employed on a weird government scheme are exactly the right people to teach my children the life lessons that I have failed to pass on to them. They're categorically counting, if you like, on people who look at a scheme like this and think, oh, my children don't need it or my grandchildren don't need it. But those plebs over there, they categorically need it. So I never got the chance to have much fun with the National Service proposal. I am, with just under 2 weeks to go until polling day, allowing myself today the pleasure of a sort of retrospective romp through one of the earliest and biggest missteps of this whole dismal campaign. But I want to include the latest development, which is that your son or daughter, having passed their driving test, could have their driving licence taken away if they refuse to do Rishi Sunak's service. And it means that despite, I hope, an engaging and vaguely nuanced introduction, the question I've got for you is unerringly simple at the end of this process. The question I've got for you is this. What's he playing at with this particular policy and the evolution of the policy last night into something that would see young people having their driving licenses and access to finance taken away? What is actually going on? We're doing the Marvin Gaye. We haven't done the Marvin Gaye for a while. What's going on? With direct and specific reference to this issue. If we feel the need to venture into the deeper end of this discussion a little later in the hour, we may look at his claim about other countries, what they do in other countries. I'm constantly delighted by the evidence from my switchboard of how many people are tuning in to these burblings from countries other than the United Kingdom. So I'm confident we'll be able to get a fair old steer. And, of course, loads of people living here who grew up in other countries and possibly undertook the various forms of national service that Rishi Sunak referred to last night. I begin, actually, with the question of whether or not, is there a country in the world where if you refuse to do national service, they take away your driving licence? But we'll move on to that. The central opener, the opening question is, Rishi Sunak, national service, confiscating driving licences. What do you think the plan is here? What do you think is going on? 0345 6060 973. I haven't got the resources to check these, and I don't think they're potentially inflammatory enough for that to be a problem. But if I read out anything that you know to be untrue, let me know and I'll correct it. Sasha tells me, when I lived in Poland, I had to do national service, otherwise I wouldn't be able to take out a mortgage. So that would be an example of the access to finance that Rishi Sunak was talking about last night. Craig tells me, in Poland, young people must either do national service or go to university, which is free. I think that last three words there are pretty crucial. And Kima tells me that in Nigeria, if you don't do your national youth service, then you can't get a government or public sector job. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Let's start in Billericay. Soren is there. Soren, what's the plan here? What's going on?
Hi, James. Sorry, first-time callers. I'm a bit nervous. I think it's the. I think, quite frankly, it's the usual thing. He's appealing to say, an age of voter who quite likes telling young people what they should do and how they should feel. And I think mainly it's that's going on. To be perfectly honest,
I think you're almost certainly right. But the bit I don't get is that it's their own grandchildren then, or it's their own children that are the ones in need of these corrective measures or these stern talking tos. So do they think that their own grandchildren need this, or do they just have that Daily Mail ability to think that it's all about other people?
I think it's probably I think it's both, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there is that general feeling, really, and that young people today don't have it as hard as I have, and if we introduce a bit of hardship, then at least they will have had it as hard as I have had.
So it's sadistic. There's a tinge of sadism attached to this kind of policy.
There is.
Because they didn't do national service. My parents' generation didn't do national service. They were all, living it up in the swinging 60s. They were living it up in the swinging 60s, and now they want the next generation to do flipping national service. That
is the funny thing, is none of them have done it. But a second reason why I actually called this, I'm originally from Denmark. And
I thought you might be.
I have two teenagers. They lived a couple of years in Denmark, but they've done all their schooling here.
Okay.
And obviously the topics come up. Let's put it like that. When in the last few weeks.
I bet, yes.
But I've actually reflected on with my kids as well that if they had stayed in Denmark, they would have been. We have national service in Denmark, and they would have been quite positive towards it, or at least neutral towards it. It would sort of been considered just, say, a step in the journey towards, the things you have to do when you finish high school before you went to university. You would have to do national service, or at least there was a chance you would have to.
Did you do it?
Yes.
What does it involve? Give me a quick snapshot of what it was like.
So you go when you turn 18, you get a letter from the government. You have to go to you have to go and have a medical examination. You take a number out of a hat, so to speak, and at that time about 1 in 3 had to go join the army. Today the number's probably a little bit lower, but that's also
what
because
did the others do? So
the others basically didn't have to do anything, if you will.
So what was the selection criteria?
Well, so first of all, the selection criteria is you have to be a Danish male of 18. And there's about sort of 35,000 of those every year, and they needed about just shy of 20,000. So you have a medical. They check that you're sort of you're.
So women don't
sane.
have to do it.
No, although that is coming now.
Okay.
There's talks about that now.
But quite rigorous physical checks then to whittle down the overall number by about a third.
They weren't all that rigorous. I mean, if you were sort of reasonable fitness, you would pass. And then oftentimes they ask, would you like to go? I mean, if you had the opportunity to volunteer. So a lot of people volunteered because they figured, I don't quite know if I want to go to university. I'm 18. It sounds like a bit of fun. So essentially they end up a fair number of people who want to go. If you really, truly didn't want to go, you could simply have said to them, look, I'm not going, and that's the end of that. Right. And you might be sent to, you might be sent out to clean beaches for a month or something like that.
Fair enough.
There were also options in case you didn't want to go into sort of the armed service. There were options for going into
you're selling it quite well, actually, Soren. You're making it sound quite attractive. But if you grew up knowing it was going to happen, it's a very different proposal, isn't it? And also, Denmark was occupied during World War II, right? So
that's where it has come in. I mean, I think today it's more seen as self-development. In my dad's time, I mean, my dad was born during the World War. In my dad's time, if you didn't have discharge papers from the army, you wouldn't get a job. That was how strongly it was really felt at the time. Obviously, as time passes.
I mean, the idea of retrofitting this is ridiculous. But I think you're right to. Or rather, I'm right to ask you to point out the potential benefits, or at least what it actually involves, because that is a decades-old system that's carefully calibrated and designed and is free, actually, from party political leanings or party political bias. So I think we would be wrong to sort of chuck out the whole notion of national service. But for this country, at this time, in this form, I completely understand why your teenagers would be balking at the prospect of it. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. And that notion of threat, so there's two things here that inform the necessity. And it may be that we're being a bit naive in thinking that the UK doesn't need this at the present time. But we were not occupied in the Second World War, so our grandparents' generation have that very fresh in their minds in countries that were. You are doing it to guard against the possibility of it happening again. And you don't have a threat on your doorstep. So Monica tells me that in Finland, her sons are Finnish, there is compulsory national service in either the army or the civil service. And the consensus is that it's necessary due to Putin's Russia being right next door. So the sanction for non-cooperation is through the courts. I don't know what the punishment would be, but I've never heard of anything like financial sanctions or driving licenses. That sounds ridiculous to me. So what is it designed? Whom is it designed to? Whom is it designed to appeal? Soren suggests sort of older people who don't like young people very much or have a very negative view of young people, which is, the cohort exists, but it will include your own children and or grandchildren. Henry is in Stanton St John. Henry, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm not a fan of Rishi Sunak because I think he's been a disaster his campaign's been dreadful, from the rain to all the cock-ups. But when he said the thing about national service, it was the one thing that I thought, actually, maybe that's a good idea. And I don't hate young people. I love young people. I've got one teenage daughter and one younger daughter. But I think they have been pampered. I've pampered my children. And I think a year in the forces, it could do them all a world of good. Think about learning to cook, learning about engineering, learning to drive really well.
There's nothing stopping them from doing that already.
No, there isn't, but they're not going to do it. Why not force them to do it?
Because they don't want to. Well, why didn't you do it?
I did CCF at school.
So did I, mate. And we both know that's a completely ridiculous contribution to this conversation. I could probably identify a chipmunk aircraft from 20 yards away, but in terms of providing me with a backbone or all of the things that you're alluding to, maybe all schools are slightly different, but you're not having that, Henry, not in a million years. Why didn't you do all these things that you think your daughters should be forced to do?
But then if I'd been forced to do it and I'd done it, I maybe really appreciate it. I just think the young are quite pampered, and it might just get them out of that.
I hear this a lot. Well, actually, I don't hear it that much from people your age because you've got teenagers in the category. But I hear it from people a lot older than you. I think it's absolute nonsense. I think they've got it harder today.
No, they've got it really hard in a way.
So let's make it harder.
No, I don't think that's making it harder.
Well, of course it is. You've just said we're going to force them to do things they don't want to do.
But once they do it, they might enjoy it.
Well, you might. So let's make it compulsory for 43-year-olds.
50-year-olds.
All right,
fine, make it compulsory for me. I would
Well, now
do
you're just
it.
being silly.
Can I just say one more thing?
So, you can, after I tell you what Alan has heard in the course of your conversation. He hears you saying, I haven't disciplined my children enough, so it's off to the front for them. He's right, though. That's what you sound like. You said, I've failed in parenting, so I'd like to hand them over to some retired regimental sergeant major who can shout at them for a year in the hope that they come back grateful.
My children are really well disciplined, but they I do too much for them.
Do less then, man. Stop waiting for the government to step in. This is such a bizarre. Go on, say the last thing you wanted to say.
The last thing I'd say, which is a little bit unrelated, but when a politician is asked a question like Keir Starmer of if he would have preferred Jeremy Corbyn to Boris Johnson, why doesn't he just say, yes, I would?
Well, he did eventually.
Did he?
Yeah.
I just wish they'd answer questions. It's so maddening.
He did.
Okay.
But anyway, that topic's in the second hour.
Sorry.
I think that lack of discipline that you've displayed there, Henry, is grounds for you being sent off to a boot camp.
I'm going to go off and join the Navy,
Go for a boot camp yes, exactly. Send me a postcard. It's coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Have you ever considered, asks Emma, that they secretly hate their own children? Henry's not in that category. But that's the corollary or the contrast to the, I don't mean you. Young people today need a serious lesson in discipline and behaviour, and national service is the way to provide it. I don't want to do national service, Grandad. Oh, no, don't worry. I don't mean you. I mean those scallywags. Those scallywags over there. So that's theory number one. Theory number two is, yes, I do mean you. I do mean you snotty-nosed little rat bag. It's time you learnt some discipline. I haven't been allowed to discipline. Is this appealing to the frustrated smackers? Is this appealing to the old people who still don't accept that we don't hit children anymore for very good reason? And I put the eternal caveat in place here that all of the parents of my parents' generation who smacked their children unenthusiastically, I think is a helpful word in this context, did not do so through malice or any negative impulse. It was just normal then, if you like, but it ain't normal now, and some people have a problem with that. Is this for the smackers, do you think? The frustrated smackers? 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headline. It is 33 minutes after 10. Here's a lovely text from a friend's wife, actually, who's managed. I should have my number, Sue, but you've managed to find the studio text number, and by a miracle, quite frankly, because it moves faster than the average ticker tape, this inbox. I did actually get the message this morning. So I would like to wish my old mate, my old school pal, I was growing up in Kidderminster. He was growing up in Stourbridge, just around the corner from Jude Bellingham's family. I'd like to wish my old school pal Chris Edwards the very, very best of luck on his sponsored 100-mile bike ride, which starts today. Go carefully, mate. And don't forget to signal. 10:34 is the time. Back to national service, but the broader question of the political calculation here. I can't see it. I can do lazy brushstrokes about appealing to angry older people or people that hate young people or people like our last caller who thinks his own children have been too pampered by, checks notes, him. But there's not enough there to make it politically salient, to make it a vote changer, a needle nudger, a vote winner. So what's the political calculation behind this? With this caveat, which is going to put me out of a job one day, the caveat that there might not be one. They might just be, like a shower head that's fallen out of the shower bracket, flailing around in the bottom of the bathtub, spraying water in all manner of random directions and soaking everything. Alice is in Ashbourne. Alice, what would you like to say?
Hello. Lovely to meet you, by the way.
Likewise, Alice. What a nice way to introduce yourself.
So, yes, I don't know if you've been told. I'm 18 years old, and I just thought I'd call in because I was listening to you on the radio just as...
So this is you. We're sending you off. You've got to do national service. If the Tories win a fortnight yesterday, you're off.
Yeah, so I did CCS for just probably creeping up to 2 years at my school.
Yeah.
And that was a personal choice I chose to make.
Yes.
And I know some of my friends who also did it definitely enjoyed it. However, I do not believe in any way that this should be mandatory and even threatened to
Why not?
the younger generation.
Why not?
Because I don't believe it's fair in any way. So, like I said, I've only just turned 18.
Yes.
And I've recently had my driving test and I passed and I'm able to drive my car now.
You're feeling very personally victimised this morning.
Yeah.
I've only just got my driving test, James, and they're going to take it away from me. It's not fair. I'm supposed to be driving everyone back from town in 3 weeks' time. What if I can't?
That's a freedom that every 17-year-old or 18-year-old looks forward to, is the day they pass the driving test. I know I personally was.
Yeah.
And the freedom and the enjoyment that comes with that, and having that threatened to be taken away to do national service, I not only think it's selfish, but I think it's really unfair that that is a threat, let alone the others. But, personally, I think such as having a driving licence potentially taken away or restricted.
So it's a weird thing for him to come out with, isn't it? Because
I agree.
Even if you might feel there is a case to be made for some form of compulsory national service, which you clearly don't, the idea of punishing people who aren't buying it by taking away something that they have paid quite a lot of money and worked quite hard to achieve seems completely counterintuitive.
No, I agree completely, and I do not think it's fair in any way. And I believe.
Why do you think he's done it? Well, if you pause for a minute and try and sort of imagine the political calculation behind the policy and then the doubling down on it last night. Either who do you think he's appealing to, or, if you prefer, what do you think he's trying to achieve?
So I believe he's appealing to the older generation. So my dad, for example, he never had to do national service.
Yeah.
But
does he think it's a good idea?
No, he doesn't.
No.
And
it's not appealing to him then.
No, but I believe the much elderly generation, so like my grandparents, I can see how that might appeal to them. However, it's like they may I think my granddad did do something similar along the lines at some point. But however, because it is not affecting them personally, it's easy enough to point at...
Need a referendum. Of 18-year-olds to decide whether or not... Because otherwise you are literally being... well, perhaps not literally, but you never know. Frog-marched into a year, spending months or a year or weeks doing something that you have absolutely no desire to do. Are you doing your A-levels next year, Alice, or have you just finished them now?
I've just finished my A-levels about a week ago.
So you've got the full whammy now. You've got your driving licence burning a hole in your pocket. You've got all those months of revision in the rear-view mirror, and you're raring to go. Yeah. And the Prime Minister popped up on the telly last night with a big safety pin threatening to pop your tyres.
Well, I think there's, generally speaking, the media puts this image of teenagers being, like these threatening people, these like gangsters, these rebels who want to cause havoc, and it's just not true. No, it is absolutely not true.
When you get to my age, you lose the ability to work out whether or not we're just seeing history repeating itself, and the older generation has always done this sort of thing with regard to the younger generation, or whether things are particularly worse now in the context of a given example like that one. And I don't know, but I do feel, as you feel, oddly, that we are giving a harder time to your generation, or portraying your generation in a much, much more negative light than previous generations have been portrayed, and much, much more unfairly. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. You're describing what you feel, how you feel about how you're treated. So you can't be wrong. 10:40 is the time, Alice. I hope you get the results that you are hoping for. And I don't want to count any chickens or jinx anything, but I think the likelihood of you having your hard-won driving licence taken away or compromised in any way, shape, or form is at the moment vanishingly slim. 10:40 is the time. Marcus is on the Wirral. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello, Marcus.
Can I say congratulations to Alice? I'm a driving instructor now after 23 years in the Army, and I know how much hard work, dedication, discipline, everything that they're saying about national service.
Just wait a minute. I love that. This is why I love my job, Marcus. I'm just saying congratulations to an 18-year-old who passed a driving test a couple of weeks ago, and the next caller on is a driving instructor. I don't know why that kind of synergy delights me. It warms the cockles of my heart. More importantly, of course, you've got 23 years military service.
Yeah. So to go to the original question, I think who this is appealing to is anybody, of my age, over 40 years old. They see the youth. Yeah. And this isn't my view. They say the youth is lazy, as you've been saying, and they think they need, a rocket up their backside to get them in place.
How dare they?
But Richie Sunak's lost my vote over this.
Has he? I'm surprised. We might talk a little about why he had it until last night, or until it was announced.
Well, till about 4 weeks ago when this policy was starting to get banded around. As I said, 23 years in the Army, and it's some of the most selfless and professional, young men and women that I've ever come across in my life. But you have to be selfless and professional to be there. You can't just be forced into that situation.
Well, it also turns it into a punishment for the people from the outside. It begins to look like a punishment, in which case the people who have signed up, who have volunteered, who have chosen to do it, are cast in quite a strange light, aren't they?
Absolutely. It disgusts me because it puts my 23-year career into a box that they believe anybody can do it. That you can take anybody off the street and make them into a soldier, which you can't. It takes a certain special kind of person to be able to do that. And to put my entire career into that one box of anybody can do it, it just disgusts me.
I think if I were defending it, I could put your mind at rest on a few fronts. I don't think it goes quite as far. I mean, I can't argue with you about how you feel, because it's how you feel, but I don't know that it quite casts the entire armed forces in the negative light that you describe.
I'm not putting the armed forces in the negative light.
No, I know you're not. I mean, that this policy would go quite as far as you describe it going in the context of how the rest of us view the military, but it does certainly sort of turn it into something like a chain gang or something like a community service punishment. It's a sanction for criminality to be sent out to work in the community. Whatever you may think of that, it changes the dynamic for people who do it voluntarily.
Yeah, I always ask somebody when they mention that national service, and I had it with, family members when I joined up and them saying everybody should do national service. So I always throw back and ask, how was your national service? Yeah. National service ended in 1960. So that means anybody over the age of 82, anybody under the age of 82 now, never did national service. So who are these people to say that national service is the key when they've had no dealings with it?
I don't know. The only one I've met is 50. The only one I've met was on the line a couple of calls before you, banging on about his own daughters being too pampered. I respect his position, but I don't know how big a cohort of voters that is.
Well, when I heard Richie Sunak talking about it the other day on Nick Ferrari's show, and he said his daughter was looking forward to doing it. Yeah. Well, why not just join the military? If you're looking forward to doing something, actually join.
Or go and do volunteering. Go and do volunteering of a different kind. There's something quite noble about volunteering, and forcing people into the same space, arguably, diminishes the nobility of the people doing it voluntarily. Thank you, Marcus. What are you going to do? Vote? Well, I can't go there, can I? Because we know where. Can I do? No, I can't. He said he's not going to vote. Let me just have a private conversation with the producer. So the national service policy has turned him off Rishi Sunak, for whose party he was previously planning to vote. Can I ask where he's going to put his vote instead? Oh, yeah. Well, how are you thinking of voting at the moment then, Marcus?
I don't know. I can tell you at the last council elections, I tipped up at the ballot box, looked at the candidates, and I couldn't vote for anybody. So I spoiled my ballot by putting a big X through it, and I'll probably do the same again this time.
I mean, you are exercising your democratic right when you do that. Even in countries where voting is compulsory, the option none of the above is one of them. But it always depresses me slightly to hear that. Not because I think your behaviour is ill-advised or unjustified, but because it speaks to a sort of broader political failure where somebody who particularly allow me to say, someone who's done the sort of service that you've done should feel more of a connection with what politicians are trying to do with the country, and it's entirely the fault of the politicians that you don't. 10:49 is the time. I don't know. I've probably alienated you over the years, but the fully paid up enthusiast for this scheme, who isn't seeing it as a way to undo the pampering that they have inflicted on their own daughters, like our lovely earlier caller, but who hears the words national service and feels the blood start pumping through their veins with a little bit more vigour. And when they are reminded that it would affect their own children and or grandchildren, they don't feel their enthusiasm for the scheme diminish in any way, shape or form, because I can't at the moment. I can't make head nor tail of what Sunak and his mates are playing at with this proposal. It just seems, that's the word I'm looking for, it just seems silly. I may have an unhinged headline for you. In fact, it's quite a long, it's a headline with another sentence underneath. It's from a little earlier this week, but I missed it at the time. But I'm now, I don't know if you were listening yesterday. Yesterday's unhinged headline was so unpleasant that I have a horrible feeling it might have polluted the whole feature for me. Am I going to be able to listen to the unhinged headline sting without being reminded of the hellscape that I introduced you to yesterday under the banner of the unhinged headline sting? Does that ever happen to you? Do you find that with names? You really like a name and then you meet someone who's got that name and they're horrible, and it puts you right off that name forever. You can't enjoy. You'll always associate someone with that name. If I have done the same to the unhinged headline sting by sharing with you yesterday the most unhinged and frankly unpleasant headline in history, then I'm going to be really upset. I'm going to be really gutted. So I think before 11 o'clock we will find out, by playing the unhinged headline sting and sharing the latest unhinged headline to catch my eye, whether or not we have done some sort of reputational damage to the whole unhinged headline feature. It's 10:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Josh is in Dunstable. Josh, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm 18 years old, and so it's one of those things where you hear a policy that affects you, and it does incense you when you can't really see any sense behind it. And I think looking at that question of who is this appealing to, why are they doing it, it feels almost as if in this sort of Conservative Party political mindset, and even that of the sort of die-hard Conservatives living in this sort of Daily Mail echo chamber, that it's going to appeal to these right-wing voters that could potentially go to Reform UK, maintain that strong right-wing base, whilst who's it going to alienate? Well, it's going to alienate young people, and people 18 to 24. They're not really going to vote Conservative if we're talking generally.
No.
And so really for them, it seems they've got everything to gain by just gaining a few cheap votes at the expense of demonising young people, as if it's not being done enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're almost, I don't know about you, Josh, but I'm almost comfortable now reminding you that it ain't ever going to happen. You can never, ever, ever say never. And we used the rather unfortunate word unclenched earlier this week to describe our attitudes to the imminent election. But given that it's almost certainly never going to happen, we file everything under a damage limitation now from a Tory point of view. And that makes your analysis quite pertinent, I think. But neither of us know how many people are in. Do you know anyone in the category that you've just described?
I mean, with regards to young people, obviously I've got a large
the older people, the people who he's appealing to. Do you know? The
older people, I know of a few sort of family friends. Right. They would probably be not necessarily diehard Conservatives, but they would be leaning towards the right wing, and they would be saying, oh, maybe I'll go Reform UK. And it's something they see as, oh, well, this is really going to revitalise nationalist sentiment. You know, these young people, they don't care about their country. They're just, they're woke.
And also it hurts people. I mean, it's policies that are designed to hurt other people, whether it's immigrants or, in this case, teenagers. We can't deport you, Josh, so we're going to make you do national service. By the time of the next election, mate, you're going to be on a plane to Rwanda, so you should count your blessings.
Well, exactly. I think it's very much the case. It seems that Sunak's sort of branch of Conservative, they're very much sort of populating a really quite harmful rhetoric that the problems of the last 14 years, well, they're not our fault. They're the fault of the young people.
If only we'd pushed the young people around a bit more. If only we'd had fewer foreign people coming in. You're absolutely right, Josh. Have you just finished your A-levels?
I have, yes.
How'd you get on?
You know, I hope they went well. You know, I've done my politics A-levels, and I'm looking at things like Rwanda and how it is just pushing the Conservative Party as far right as possible just to try and grasp onto maybe another 5 years, which seems very unlikely. But the harm they're doing in trying to do that, it's probably something we can't measure until it's done, but it's certainly very harmful to young people.
Well, I think
everyone that criticising.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, and good luck. I hope you get the results that you want. I think Starmer touched on that last night. I think did I hear the phrase performative cruelty come out of his mouth in one of the clips? One of my favourite phrases, as you know. But I think that Starmer has started calling out what you describe, but he does so now, of course, from a position of great theoretical strength, although it ain't over until it's over. There we go. Johnny says, I wish this 18-year-old was my son. What an eloquent young man. And well, I hope you haven't got an 18-year-old son, Johnny, and if you do, I hope he isn't listening. Prana is in Hampton. Prana, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning. It's actually Prana. Prana Bud. Kids used to call me
Prana. I thought I said Piranha.
No, you said Piranha.
I didn't say Piranha. I said Prana. But if it sounded like Piranha, let's get. Hang on. All right, global player.
Everybody calls me Piranha.
I'm not called. I would never call you Piranha. That would be very fishy.
You just did it again.
I didn't.
Did it again, James.
Well, then it's a mispronunciation.
All right. Well, it's actually Prana Bud, which is the full name.
PUD on the end.
Yes.
Okay, Prana Pud.
That's right. Thank you.
Pranapad, what would you like to say?
Thank you, James. Well, I came over from India when I was 3, and sadly, as a consequence, I didn't feel entirely Indian. I didn't feel entirely English.
Oh, yeah.
But when I went to the Cub Scouts, right, and I had to learn the Cub Scout oath, which was hard. I'm not the brightest of kids, right? There's hard work for me. When I said it, right, and I gave my oath to the Queen at the time, do you know, I felt a tiny bit more English. Do you know what I mean? A tiny bit. And I look at my son, right? And I've worked hard, James. I know everybody else works hard, but I've worked hard. He's at private school. We came with nothing. So it's a private school.
Yeah.
He's 13 years old. And all he does, right, is he lies on the sofa, right, watching YouTube shorts, right? And I said to my missus, I said, listen, look at him. And I said, mate, if you're going to support, right, in the World Cup this year, you're going to support in cricket, in the Cricket World Cup, you support England, you support India. You've got a bit of both, mate. Yeah. He goes, I'm not bothered. I said, mate, you play club cricket. Actually, you're not bothered. He goes, I'm not bothered about them. And I said, mate, what you need, right? I said, what you need, basically, is a good bit of... I thought, if you went and did a bit of national service, you might feel a bit of a patriotic change, you know. And I said to my missus, right, I said, look at him.
Yeah. What did she say? What did she say?
She said, listen, darling, you've done all you can, right? You've got the best education money can buy, right? You can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I said, you can't even shove his head in it.
Wise woman, Pranabad.
I said, shove his head in it. Get in the backbone.
I mean, what makes you think they'd succeed where you have failed so dismally?
What do you mean I failed?
Well, I'm just going by your own analysis of it. You've failed to make him patriotic. You've failed to make him engage with sport. You've failed to make him physically active. You've failed to get him off his sofa watching YouTube shorts. What makes you think they'd succeed where you failed?
James, you know what?
What?
There's no point in undermining if you don't change it.
No, I know, but there's no point quoting me back at me if you're not answering the question that I just asked you. You silly sausage. What's he playing at? So why do you think some stranger...
What I'm saying, James,
yeah.
You've made me change my mind. So this is 3 minutes of my life well spent.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, you've changed your mind about your son now. So you've changed your mind about national service.
Yeah, and also, there's 3 minutes, right?
That was easy.
Although school fees, like if you have to about the school fees,
yes,
it's going to hurt me a tiny bit. It's not enough to turn against Labour, right? So I'm going to vote Labour for you, James.
That's
I've always been a Tory.
Yeah.
I've changed my mind, so thank you, mate.
Well, crikey. We crammed a lot into that 3 minutes, didn't we? And I enjoyed it enormously. Thank you. It is. I'll probably squeeze in one more. Jacob's in Acton. Jacob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jacob.
It's good to speak to you. My first time.
Welcome.
I mean, what can I say? If things keep going the way they are and the Tories get in again, you're going to be able to add some more chapters to that book.
No, God forbid.
There'll be one benefit there.
No, hardly.
For you, at least, but it won't be a benefit for the rest of us.
No, you're not wrong. So you sound as if this policy is a little bit closer to your generation than it is to mine.
Yeah, well, I'm 25 and I'm a youth worker. I have been all of my adult life.
Oh wow!
I love working with young people, but and I work with a diverse bunch. I've got different groups that I work with. Some of them are from a slightly more advantaged background, some from really deprived backgrounds, and they're going through real issues. And it frustrates me so much that, like, I don't know, like you said, I don't know what Sunak and his mates are thinking.
No, you can't get. You can normally get a handle on it, and there is the obvious answer, or they're just appealing to this sort of sticky constituency. But you'd think there'd be more to it. You'd think that you'd be able to see their workings, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
and you can't.
I think that's it. I think they're just appealing to an older audience, hoping that gets them the votes that they're scared of losing, rather than dealing with the actual issues that young people are facing. I mean, I've got several young people that are on the waiting list to get mental health support, and they have been for 12 months.
Yeah.
You know, I've got another youth worker friend who's actually lost one of their young people because of mental health. No.
I'm sorry.
And it's just, it's ridiculous.
And these schemes are not really, or at least they're not reaching you, who works in the heart of the sector, the relevant sector, as doing any of the things that need to be done. Will you forgive my ignorance if I ask you a question? I'm a little late for the news, so we'll have to both be brief.
Yeah.
But how do young people come to you, if you see what I mean? Do you work for a charity, for a council? Are you in a space? What space are you in?
So I work for a church. We're a very community-focused church, so we don't, through that work, we don't try to share our faith. We just go out and
you're doing basically missionary work with people who need help.
Well, to an extent. I mean, it's not. We're open about being Christians, but we're more about just actually stepping in where the cuts of government funding have been over the last 14 years. The estate where we were lost its youth club, so we stepped in and recreated it.
Wow. Okay. So you confirmed my fears that this is built entirely upon goodwill, charity, and I quite like the phrase Christian values. Whether it's fashionable or not doesn't matter. It's not something that the government. You're filling holes that the government have created effectively.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Thank you for what you do. That's lovely to hear, and it speaks back to the caller from the Wirral about how forcing people to do things that some people do through goodness or vocation or faith cheapens the rather beautiful impulses that push people like Jacob into the kind of work that they do, because you're turning around and treating it almost as a punishment for people who don't want to do it. And I don't like that. I really don't like that. It's 11:02. 5 minutes after 11 is the time, and now we come to a topic that I can't quite believe we have never come to before. We have in various ways, shapes and forms, but we've never come at it directly. I said to you some time ago, and I don't expect any prizes for this, you'd already arrived at this conclusion yourself, I just get paid to say it out loud. And obviously the evidence for it comes from the more dismal moments of PMQs, when you can measure the desperation of Rishi Sunak, or indeed Boris Johnson. I don't think Liz Truss was there long enough to fall foul of this phenomenon. But did anyone else get reminded there when I said fall foul of this phenomenon by the question on Mystery Hour yesterday about why we like alliteration so much? I did. It just popped into my head. I don't think Liz Truss was around long enough to fall foul of this phenomenon. But Boris Johnson certainly did, and Rishi Sunak does it all the time. When things are going really badly in PMQs, break glass and release the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn, who, of course, remains in the House of Commons, or did, currently, of course, a candidate, but is not a member of the Labour Party. And the attempts by the Conservative Party and by, I don't want to say client media, because sometimes the tail wags the dog. So because right-wing media have been trying desperately, in the absence of pretty much anything else with which to hurt Keir Starmer at the moment, and that's not an opinion, that's counting, I'm just looking at the polls, they have reached for desperate measures. And the most desperate of measures is to hitch him to Jeremy Corbyn. It's not entirely without justification. Let's not be silly about it. He served in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet while it was clear to everybody, because we knew from ballots and vote results that pretty much nobody in the Parliamentary Labour Party wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be their leader, but he was installed and kept there by the broader membership. And attempts to tarnish, I like that word, attempts to tarnish Keir Starmer with his association to Rishi Sunak have now reached critical mass. They've reached critical mass to such a point that I find myself wondering whether we should talk about it. And this is where I have sympathy for Fiona Bruce in last night's Question Time, because it's a conversational agenda that is being set by Tory client journalists. It is literally a talking point for the kind of people that told you Brexit would be a good idea, Boris Johnson would be a good Prime Minister, Liz Truss had a brilliant budget, and that Rishi Sunak was going to bring back integrity, professionalism and accountability. And although they are some of them are a little bit subdued in the current climate, they are still out there. None of them have lost their jobs, and they're still punting absolutely bonkers theories. But all of the other accusations or allegations against Keir Starmer have fallen apart. So what are they left with? Jeremy Corbyn. You were with Jeremy Corbyn, culminating last night in him being pushed to answer the question of who he thought would be a better Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. And he kind of finally answered the question by saying, well, anyone would have been better than Boris Johnson, including Jeremy Corbyn. He's not a naturally light-hearted public speaker, is he? Because he could have gone, what Johnson would have said if the tables had been turned. He'd have said something like, I've got furniture that would have been a better Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn. I'm familiar with it. There is an amoeba in a Petri dish in a laboratory in Kuala Lumpur that would have been a better Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn. And Starmer could have done it the other way around. He could have said, I've got furniture that would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. I've got dust on my shoes that would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. Or, and he's not good at this either, he could have just hit the greatest hits of Boris Johnson. He could have hit the lies about the party. My favourite bit is the parties, even though the body's piling high and the catastrophic handling of the early days of COVID are much more serious issues. My favourite bit is the chronology of what he actually did in Parliament when he insisted that there hadn't been any parties. And then he conceded that there had been parties, but he had categorically not known about them. And then he conceded that there had been parties and he had actually known about them, but he most definitely had never attended any of them. Is anyone keeping count? Is that 3? Is that stage 3? And then he reached the point where there had been parties and he had known about them and he had actually attended them, but he hadn't been aware that they were parties. And then he was found to be in contempt of Parliament by a committee of his own peers, including Conservatives, because he had lied through his teeth to the whole bally lot of them. And you will remember Keir Starmer saying in the middle of that little saga, that little chronology, he said, the closest he's ever got to a catchphrase, I think, for Keir Starmer, where he said, OK, we'll just leave that there, or words to that effect. And you told me at the time that was evidence of his legal training when he knew that he had, if you like, led a witness into a position that they would later come to regret. 11/11 is the time. So they have reanimated the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn. They have applied the electrodes to the nipples of Jeremy Corbyn and sent jolts of electricity through his body to the point where the ghost, they're trying to revivify the ghost. 11/11 is the time. And I want to know whether it will work. And I don't know who the target audience is for this, if you see what I mean. Because there's lots of people out there who still feel that Jeremy Corbyn was a man more sinned against than sinning. So I don't know how you answer this question, because you'll say, no, he's definitely not still too toxic to damage Keir Starmer. And I'll say, so Keir Starmer's going to do brilliantly then. And you'll go, oh no, rats, I don't want Keir Starmer to do brilliantly because I'm real Labour. I guess you are someone who could be swayed into thinking that Jeremy Corbyn is still toxic enough. There are also people, of course, who say Jeremy Corbyn's not toxic at all. But that, unfortunately, is not borne out by events. Almost all of the research done into the 2019 election result had dislike for, or disdain for Jeremy Corbyn ranked more highly than enthusiasm for Boris Johnson, or even a desire to get Brexit done. So the toxicity of Jeremy Corbyn, I'm afraid, in the eyes of the electorate, whether it's fair or not, the toxicity of Jeremy Corbyn is a matter of historical fact. I'll say that again. The toxicity of Jeremy Corbyn in the eyes of the electorate, whether this is fair or not, is a matter of historical fact. But Keir Starmer has managed to lance that boil, both, I think, politically and personally. Jeremy Corbyn no longer a member of the Labour Party. But does his reputation still cast a dark enough shadow to damage Keir Starmer? So on this occasion, we don't have the challenge that we had in the first hour. It is incredibly clear to see what they are hoping to achieve by hanging Jeremy Corbyn around Sir Keir Starmer's neck. They're trying to reanimate some of the negativity that helped propel Boris Johnson into Downing Street in 2019. I can't answer the question of whether or not Jeremy Corbyn would have been a worse Prime Minister than Boris Johnson? I can't answer that question because I don't know. But I certainly don't think it's an easy question to answer. I think Boris Johnson was a catastrophically awful Prime Minister. But I can't say in good conscience that I truly believe Jeremy Corbyn would have been better. If I were the leader of the Labour Party, I would have done what Keir Starmer did and added something funny. I would have added something like, I've eaten chocolate bars that would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. I've ridden bicycles that would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. And Keir Starmer kind of fudged it. We should probably have a listen to how he actually dealt with this line of inquiry, because the question of whether or not it can damage him, whether or not it can tarnish him, will depend partly on how he handles it, won't it? It will depend partly on how he handles it. And that's what I want to know. So you don't have to be in the middle of this story to join in. It's not about you necessarily, although if reanimating the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn is enough to nudge your electoral needle, is enough to move your vote, then you are going to be particularly interesting on this issue. 0345 6060 973. My personal position is that it's not an effective gambit because Johnson was so awful. So it might have been an effective gambit in other circumstances, but Boris Johnson was an unspeakably awful Prime Minister on every imaginable level, in what he did to the party, in what he did to Parliament, and in what he did to the country. We were talking the other day about the immediate aftermath of that 2019 victory, and everybody involved in it were swanning around like victorious Roman generals. They thought they were going to be in Downing Street for decades. Some really unpleasant, entitled, arrogant advisors who were keen to make connections with LBC producers and presenters were swanning around as if they owned the flipping place, because there was a sense that the size of the majority and the failure of Corbyn and the toxicity surrounding Corbyn were going to be in place for so long that it would take a new leader 1 or 2 terms of Parliament to get that oil tanker turned around, to shrug off the stench of anti-Semitism, to move the party into a place where it could be a viable electoral force. They underestimated 2 things. They underestimated 3 things. The inevitability of Brexit coming back to bite them on the backside. That always amazed me, the fact that none of them could see that coming. Now it's all about, it was always going to happen like this, or there is a great Brexit, but it goes to a different school. I'm very happy to think that anybody listening to in fact, the people who were listening to this programme during that period will be the least surprised people in the world by the catastrophe that Brexit has very quickly become. So they underestimated that. They underestimated the awfulness of Boris Johnson. That's what I used to say to you. I used to list all the things he'd done, all the things that he'd lied about, all the people that he'd lied to, whether it was his wife or his mistress or his employer or his party leader or his voters. And I used to do it endlessly because it achieved 2 things. It reminded you of how awful he was, but it also reminded you of how much his supporters and his admirers didn't care. That bit was quite Trumpian. That bit was quite shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. But they also underestimated, and I think I did too, the speed and effectiveness with which Keir Starmer would grasp this particular nettle. The speed and effectiveness with which he would dispense with that stench of anti-Semitism and sympathies for Putin's Russia and all of the other things that were hanging around Jeremy Corbyn's neck for decades, calling Hamas friends, all of the things that were guaranteed to alienate huge swathes of the electorate. I don't think anybody thought Starmer would be able to pull that off as quickly as he has. And that is why the question of whether or not the toxicity of Corbyn remains strong enough to meaningfully tarnish Starmer is one that I don't know about. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So I'm afraid some of the premises behind this question are indisputable. The toxicity is indisputable. And yet the question of whether or not it remains strong enough to actually damage Keir Starmer, who served in his shadow cabinet, who publicly stated a desire to see him made Prime Minister, and who stood alongside him on countless platforms. All of those things are true. But I don't know whether or not anybody capable of being persuaded into a negative position about Keir Starmer isn't in it already. And that's what we'll have a look at shortly. Okay? 0345 6060 973. I'm not reanimating the Jeremy Corbyn debate. It is a matter of historical record that the electorate found him toxic. But is that toxicity still strong enough to make Keir Starmer's associations with him electorally damaging for Keir Starmer? And we'll hear how he dealt with that question himself after this. It is 22 minutes after 11, and I've changed my mind. As Pranabud reminded me earlier, there is no point having a mind if you never change it. I think it might work. I think if you're a wobbly Tory, then possibly the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn is still scary enough to spook you. It took me 20 minutes to do that introduction, and I didn't get to that. That's a great line. Is the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn still scary enough to spook voters? Lewis is in Caerphilly. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
you'll
Lewis.
You'll have to forgive me. I'm a little bit nervous about this one.
It's only me.
Oh, I know we've spoken a couple of times, but usually it's on my subject area, which is academia.
Okay.
I'm a lefty academic,
yes.
And I actually joined the Labour Party when Corbyn was in charge.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people who doesn't actually feel that Keir Starmer is left-leaning enough for my taste.
Fair enough.
But weirdly, I'm also not ideologically so kind of stuck in my ways that I would be one of these people who says, no, I couldn't vote for Starmer.
Because you've only got a choice, really, between two prime ministers 2 weeks yesterday, haven't you? And that is why a lot of people like me voted for Jeremy Corbyn last time, although I'd probably deploy the Keir Starmer defence and say I didn't really think he had any chance of being Prime Minister, so I never really had to do that calculation on who would actually be worse, Corbyn or Johnson, which is where they've pushed Keir Starmer to in the last 24 hours or so.
Which I think is a strange place to push into, because he keeps using the phrase, and so does everybody else who do the media rounds, this is a changed Labour Party.
Yes.
So in breaking the emergency Jeremy Corbyn glass, it's actually giving him the opportunity to distance himself from it. Politically, I think that's incredibly naive of the Conservatives, but then, everything they've done in this campaign has been politically very naive.
Not quite everything, because I choose my words carefully because I don't want to either sound condescending or portray you as condescending. But this could appeal to people who aren't thinking about it quite as deeply as you are.
Well, that's a problem.
Or as paying as
to think about things quite deeply.
Or people who aren't paying as much attention as you are, because they're saying that what you've got is the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn. It suddenly appeared behind Keir Starmer. It's gone woo, and people have got scared. And the idea that Keir Starmer then says, "Yes, but hang on a minute, I chucked him out the party, and it is a completely changed." They've already run away. They've already put their head in their hands. They've already stuck their fingers in their ears.
I understand exactly where you're coming from, but this is kind of where I stopped being an academic, and it's really one of the reasons I was quite nervous calling you.
Okay.
Is because I then start to think with heart instead of head. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it. I think it's giving him that talking point. And I just wish that he was a little bit more pizzazzy in his response, because I think that would hit a lot harder. At the moment, he's kind of trying to go about it in a very measured way. We're saying, look, I didn't think that he was going to win and what have you. But I just wish that, like you said, that he would come across, and when somebody says, do you think that Corbyn would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson? You say, well, look, this is a guy who lied to the Queen, lied to you, lied to Parliament, and do all of those talking points and say, well,
he could have phrased it like that as well, couldn't he? He could have said, well, I'll tell you what, my feelings about Jeremy Corbyn are fairly clear now that he is no longer in the Labour Party, but I do not think he would have unlawfully prorogued Parliament. I do not think he would have sent a minister to Balmoral to lie to the Queen. I do not think that he would have lied to the House of Commons repeatedly about parties. I do not think he would have appointed a proven sex pest to a position of prominence in that. So he could. That's the way you'd answer that question, isn't it?
James, I'm so glad you said that because you just bailed me out. They were the talking points that I wanted to say and I couldn't quite get out. And
God bless that one. But I've been doing it for years, mate. Honestly, it's like he just put a penny in the slot and I can't. It's a miracle I stopped. But that's what he should have done, I think. I think he should have done that. And whether it's that ruthless caution that we've talked about a lot, or whether it is just, you know, here are two people. One of them's got the facility to list those things off like trippingly. One of them who's much cleverer than the other one hasn't. And Starmer is more like you than me.
I think so. And I think I hope in some way that I've contributed towards the conversation a little bit.
No, it's a perfect contribution. And all it does now is leave that question hanging of how many people are in the category that I've described. You don't think there's many in it, if any. I'm not so sure. I don't know. I call it let's say the wobbly Tory, or the 2019 wobbler, who was spooked by Jeremy Corbyn. Can resurrecting the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn wobble you back again? I honestly don't know, which is why this is such an interesting question. Lewis, God bless. Thank you. Hazel's in High Wycombe. Hazel, what do you think?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer could have won whatever he said, because there's still quite a lot of support for Corbyn. There's quite a lot of people who are very anti-Corbyn. And I think just the word Corbyn is enough, regardless of what Keir Starmer would have said, to have just keep this debate on and on and on. And
but does it hurt Starmer, though, Hazel, crucially? Or does it, because what you've just described is people in quite deeply entrenched positions, does it tempt anybody out of one position into another one?
Well, I'd like to raise a point that might, because back in 2015, when Ed Miliband was in the leaders' debate,
yes,
they raised about, oh, you're going to go in with the SNP, you're going to go in with the SNP. Whatever he said, because the SNP wanted a coalition, they said you're lying, or, oh, no, you're going to go in with the SNP. And then what happened? The election happened, and Theresa May went in with the DUP straight away.
I see what you mean, yeah.
So
it's politics.
So I would say that it's a deliberate trap they're setting for him. But if people were to think that actually, look at past record, it's not something that the Tories have shied from, saying, oh, no, you're going to go in with the SNP, but now we need to go in with the DUP.
I think you also remind us of the fact that there's sometimes a danger that we think that they're appealing to everybody or trying to appeal to everybody. They could be just appealing to a very specific set of voters who have been shown to be amenable to the reminder of Jeremy Corbyn, because Sunak and Johnson had personal popularity levels, I've just been reminded by No Hostages, that were every bit as low as Jeremy Corbyn. So it's not like he's going to prove to be a magic bullet, but he might just wobble a few votes. That's kind of where they seem to be now, isn't it? Just trying to wobble a few votes back in their own direction.
Yeah, I think by pushing the media into Corbyn, the Tories generally don't care whether Starmer succeeds or not, because they've succeeded in just repeating Corbyn. And I know people who wouldn't even look at Jeremy Corbyn's policies because he didn't wear a poppy. Because
he didn't wear a poppy. I mean, I think that Starmer didn't. Yeah, you're right. It is. It's just gone 11:30. Hazel, thank you. We haven't even listened to what he said, how he dealt with the issue yesterday. To be clear, I'm not on this occasion criticising Fiona Bruce. I think that the subject was absolutely necessary. This has to be addressed because it is part of the discourse surrounding the general election, but it has been made part of the discourse by the kind of right-wing media that told you Brexit would be brilliant, Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, Liz Truss's budget would be outstanding, and that Rishi Sunak was Mr. Integrity, Professionalism and indeed accountability. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. So I'd like to apologise to the producer of this programme, Eleanor, because yesterday we had a disagreement about whether or not it would be appropriate to include a certain headline that I had stumbled across in my unhinged headline feature, and she was adamant that we shouldn't do it. Quite adamant, very animated. And I pressed ahead regardless, and I did unhinged headline, and I read a headline, and even the memory of it makes a little bit of sick come out. And I know that a lot of you responded in exactly the same way, and I'd like to apologise to you as well. I think that I let Eleanor down, I let you down, but most of all, I let myself down. And what I'm worried about now is whether or not yesterday's unhinged headline was so profoundly unpleasant that I've ruined the entire feature for all of us. So I'm about to hit the sting again. All right, Keith is about to hit the button. We're about to hear the sting, the unhinged headline sting, and we're about to find out whether or not we have spoilt it forever, polluted it forever with yesterday's truly disgusting. I see it's a disgusting headline yesterday. It's not an unhinged headline. It was unhinged, but it was unhinged to the point of disgusting. And the comedy, I think, dissipates when you move from unhinged to truly gross. And no, I'm not going to read it out again, not in a million years. You can go listen back if you must on Global Player to yesterday's programme, but there's no way I'm going to read it out again. So we go back now to the traditional territory of unhinged headline. Perhaps inevitably, we turn to the Daily Telegraph and we find this.
Unhinged headline.
Britain is about to pass the point of no return. Labour will have free rein to unleash a technocratic socialist redistribution of wealth and to install a Brownite constitution from hell.
Unhinged headline.
I think I'm all right. I'm all right. Are you all right? Are you? Yeah, I'm not 100. I'm okay, though. I'm definitely not okay, if you see what I mean. I think we'll be all right. We'll probably find out on Monday. I'm not reading it again, though. And I'm sorry to everyone who's upset simply by me mentioning it. Let's have a listen to how Keir Starmer actually dealt with the attempts to reanimate the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn.
Can I just remind you, because you backed that manifesto, you also said in February 2019 that Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. Now, you said already you thought you were going to win that election. But putting that to one side, you said he would make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it, or did you have your fingers crossed behind your back?
Look, I didn't think we would win that election.
You said that, but irrespective of that, you said he'd make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it?
It wasn't a question that really arose because I didn't think we were going to win the election. And now,
but we all heard you. We all heard you saying he would be a great Prime Minister. That was your way of telling the people here, vote for him. Did you not mean that?
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. And I'm glad I did.
But you also campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
Campaigning for the Labour Party. I was a Labour politician. I wanted to be elected or re-elected, and I wanted good colleagues to be re-elected.
Just answer this.
Some of the people around the shadow cabinet table were people whose seats were saved because we campaigned hard for the Labour Party.
Just answer this yes or no. When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
Look, he would be a better Prime Minister. Well, look what we got, Boris Johnson. A man who made massive promises, didn't keep them, and then had to leave Parliament in disgrace.
Did you think he'd make a great, not even just a great Prime Minister?
I didn't think we were in a position to win that election.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because he said the thing about, he criticised Rishi Sunak's manifesto for being like a Jeremy Corbyn manifesto. So in some ways, he's already answered the question. But I guess it's his own integrity that comes under question if he says, I said something that I didn't mean, so he avoids actually saying it out loud. Back to the question of whether it will work. Phil is in Chippenham. Phil, what do you reckon?
I'm thinking the Conservatives are desperate. I think everybody knows that, though, in a terrible state. And hemorrhaging votes, the polls are awful, it could be historically bad. And so grasping at anything, what can we do? And there's policies like the National Service. And I think of all the policies, this actually could be... It's
not, to be clear, I know you know this, but just for the benefit of the tape, it's not a policy, is it? It's a tactic.
Sure. Yeah, tactic, absolutely. And I think of all the tactics, this could be one of the most effective. I think it's generally thought that people tend to pollsters, they're less inclined to give right-wing opinions. For example, Brexit, if you like, the pollsters right up to the minute, and apparently people were ashamed to say that they would vote for Brexit, and when it happened, and I think the people who get into the polling station, if they think, more extreme left wing could come in, think of self-interest. I
don't think it works if you think about it that deeply. I think it's more of a mood or a vibe. If you walk in there with a Corbyn-y vibe when you see the Labour offer on the ballot paper, then it might work. But they're not going to think that because this was the point the previous caller made. It actually leaves the door open for Starmer to remind everybody that he got rid of Corbyn. So the more you think about it, the sillier it becomes. But politics is the point we often miss in politics is that most people aren't thinking about it that much.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's as deep thinking as you think, because I think, it's that self-interest thing.
But if you think about... No, what I'm saying is if you think about it deeply, there's no way you're going to conclude that Keir Starmer is keeping Jeremy Corbyn's seat warm or that he's going to usher him back into the party or anything like that. But if you don't think about it too deeply and you get a whiff of Corbyn, it might still be enough to put you off Starmer because of the things that we're being reminded about repeatedly now by the Tories. It's remarkable that it is close to all they've got left, whichever way you dice it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think it's that thing where I think you and I, what we're saying is not that different, really. I'm just saying it maybe it's a Corbyn thing, but it's also a left-right wing thing that people, out of self-interest, your middle voters who might think, oh, could taxes go up? Oh, and they think of negative things that Corbyn would be the poster boy of,
yes,
and then just fall the side of going back to the Tories because they haven't admitted to the pollsters. I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah, no, it is possible. I think it's probably more surface level than you do, but I don't disagree with the idea that it's effective or that it might work. It might actually tempt a few wobblables or a few wobblers back into the Tory fold. Otherwise, you could say otherwise they wouldn't keep doing it. In normal circumstances, you'd say otherwise they wouldn't keep doing it. But in these circumstances, you perhaps would wonder what else might they do? What else can they do? 11:40 is the time. Ian is in Cowes. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Ian.
Right, a long time listener,
yeah.
Second time caller, like
Thank
about 10 years ago. Well, actually,
good Lord.
Sort of you're a bit horrible to me the first time I called.
Excellent.
Right, strangely enough, you actually
Did you go viral? Did you go viral?
No.
Oh, you lucky man.
It was something about marriage and stuff like that. You were being self-righteous. And I came on with my most ironic voice possible, and you didn't get that. I was being ironic. But anyway. Right,
I'm glad you're over it. I'm glad it hasn't preyed on your mind.
Well, that's the thing. I need to learn how to let things go. But the fact that you actually brought it up yesterday, I thought, right, I could definitely call in. Right, the thing is, my thing is with this is it's down to the media and the fact that they're so prejudiced, or it seems that way, prejudiced against Labour. And basically, it's like no matter what happens, like Labour always seem to get it much harder than the Tories do. So, for instance, with the whole Jeremy Corbyn thing, when, like, for instance, any of the Tory politicians come on the show and they're saying, oh, blah, 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 but, he's he's still, you can't trust him because of
Jeremy Corbyn.
Because of Jeremy Corbyn. How comes, the commentator or the interviewer doesn't say, but hang on a minute, you came on our shows often during the Partygate scandal and said there were no parties. They don't hold him to account.
You're talking about interviewers. I mean,
interviewers.
I think you're absolutely right. Michael Gove tried to defend Dominic Cummings' eye test, claiming that he was on Nick's show and he started actually trying to say, before he actually collapsed under the weight of his own absurdity, he started trying to claim that he too had often gone on car journeys in order to test his eyesight. But I think he realised what was about to come out of his mouth and sort of gave up. So what you're reminding us, what the Tories have defended and allowed, up to and including Liz Truss's budget, actually, is as nothing compared to having sat next to Jeremy Corbyn for 3 years.
I do, exactly. And actually...
Doesn't mean it won't work. It doesn't mean it won't work, Ian.
But it is working.
Yeah.
That's the point. I listen to the phone-in all the time. By the way, I've got to say, even though I was what I said at the beginning...
I think you were very unfairly treated, clearly, 10 years ago.
I listen to you every day because you're the voice of reason.
Oh, you're very kind.
I'm sat here and I'm listening to what's going on, and I'm thinking, can nobody else see this? Can nobody else see what is going on? Please. So then I listen to you the next day because you'll generally put it straight and make me realise.
You'll feel, you'll think, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Old James is there for me. Even though he was a right prat to me 10 years ago, he's still got his head screwed on right. That's what you say to yourself, isn't it? I think you've nailed this, though. I'd forgotten about this. So anybody now doing the whole, but what about Jeremy Corbyn thing, should really be hitting every Tory minister with the, remind me where you were on the Liz Truss budget, remind me where you were on Partygate.
But they don't. Yeah. The only person who obviously does it, but I actually heard Andrew Marr last night actually talk about it. You should actually troll that out and play it back, because he was like, he's in a political party, and basically you have to, if you're in the shadow cabinet or you're in the cabinet, you have to support what's going on or resign.
Yes.
And so what? Was he supposed to resign because of Jeremy Corbyn? Like all the Tory politicians now who are backing Rishi Sunak to save their seats, are we going to turn around to them later on and say, well, Rishi Sunak was a terrible, terrible Prime Minister, but you supported him?
With Truss. I mean, you look at what the papers did with Truss, and it actually beggars belief, Ian. The speed with which they moved from describing it as the finest Tory budget ever. Nigel Farage described it as the best Tory budget since 1986, although I think he was getting mixed up with 1988. I could be wrong. Daily Mail describing it in incredibly strong terms. People at the Telegraph, the Express, greeting it as the finest fiscal event in the history of fiscal events. Fast forward 30 or 40 days. And they're all not only insisting that she has to go, but pretending that they were never big fans of hers in the first place. But hey-ho, Jeremy Corbyn. It is 11:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we have a slight change of gear at the moment. Ian Goldin is the Professor of Globalisation and Development at the University of Oxford. His latest book, The Shortest History of Migration, is something that I wanted to bring to your attention because it wades into territory that is, in election periods, even more febrile, perhaps, than it is the rest of the time. And it attempts, I think it's fair to say, Ian, it attempts to bring facts to territory that is ordinarily dominated by feelings. So why did you write it?
I wrote it because this is such an important topic, because I feel there's so much noise and smoke, but very little light around it, and that it needs to be better informed by facts, by a historical perspective, by an understanding of that we're all migrants, and we deny that at our peril, and that migrants are going to be vital for our future in the UK and elsewhere. So it's trying to put the debate into perspective, and it's also trying to take on board some of the negative arguments around it. Why is there this disconnect between what economists tend to think and what politicians and the public tend to think?
What politicians publicly profess to think, because, of course, privately they're being advised by the economists who make precisely the opposite point.
Yes, often. I mean, they have to be seen, and we've seen that classically in the Brexit disaster and in the subsequent years. They have to be seen to be saying tough things, but often, as we've seen record net migration numbers in recent years, the opposite might happen.
And it's leached from the right to the left now as well. The discourse has become almost consensus, hasn't it, on the migration in itself being a net negative. So what is the broader historical context? We can talk about record net migration in the context of the last 20 years, but that is going to be accommodating Hong Kong and Ukraine most obviously. If we were looking at a much broader sweep of migration by historical standards, what sort of era are we in at the moment?
We're in a very normalized era already. About 3% of the world's population is migrating. That's been a constant number for over 100 years, really. Until the First World War, of course, there were no passports. There were no borders as we know them today. And so not only the documentation of it, but the freedom to move was something completely different. There were much higher levels of migration in the latter parts of the 19th century, the age of mass migration. Sometimes 20% of the US population was migrant, 30% of the Argentinian population, and mass out-migration. A third of Ireland moving out. The Irish population is still much smaller today than it was in the 1850s, for example.
And they're having their controversies
Sweden,
at the moment.
Italy, these mass movements of people in the second half of the 19th century. Then we go into an age of control, which is really the First World War post-period, and that's been relatively stable at about 3%. Of course, there are many more borders.
Yes.
So you'd say people that used to go from one place to another, say in the Soviet Union,
of course,
weren't crossing a border. Now they are. So actually, it's remarkable that the numbers aren't much higher. Now, because the world's population has grown, the actual numbers are higher, but not the share.
Well, I presume it's got something to do with majority and minority populations, because the migrations that you describe, whether it's the Irish outgoing or the American incoming, they weren't necessarily accompanied by the sort of performative cruelty or the rhetoric that we associate with some forms of migration, but others were. So I've been reading recently about attempts to blame the Dutch for the Great Fire of London or the expulsion of the Hansa merchants from Elizabethan London. There's always that scapegoat element has always been there, despite the facts.
Yes. Yes, I mean, generation after generation for the last 1,000 years in the UK and the same in other places, you know, the latest wave of migrants get regarded as the troublemakers, as the sources of problems, and so forth. Of course, often they left because they had to. The pogroms in Eastern Europe, you've spoken eloquently about the impact of the Nazi regime in Germany and the failure of Britain to accept people then. But it's not always, and of course the Great Famine in Ireland propelled people out. But it's always been this rather strong for us. On the other hand, into the US, for example, people were often welcomed. And one of the things that happened in the first half of the 20th century is many governments, including this government in the Windrush, had massive programs to bring people here. You know, in the 1950s, the UK was going out searching for people. It had recruitment agencies. It was paying for people's voyages to come here. So it's not always been that the state has been anti-migrant.
And yet the population is always susceptible to being pushed into that position, which makes one element of your work, the measurable impact of migration on the societies that immigrants come to, simultaneously crucial and frustrating, because you'd think, well, if only everybody understood this, then we could park this forever and get on with the business of proper politics.
Yeah. From an economist's perspective, it's really, very difficult, because there's so much contribution in the short term, because migrants tend to be more workers and less dependents. They perform absolutely vital services, and a lot of what we blame as the problem, like the pressure on the NHS or the pressure on housing, migrants are a big part of the solution. But that gets drowned out by the fact that the costs are often felt by communities in the short term, and it's rather like trade debates. There are places, and I think we need to empathize with people in these places, that are feeling pressures on social services, pressures on housing. There's been a massive cut in public housing in the UK. There's been a movement of people to where the new jobs are. And so people are experiencing this and saying the foreigners are to blame. And I think we need to deal with the problem as part of the solution to making people feel more comfortable about immigrants.
Because all of these factors are more likely to get worse than better, regardless of what politicians do. If they manage to somehow stem the flow of humanity, then things like falling fertility and indeed climate change are going to change everything.
An absolute disaster. I mean, if Nigel Farage were to achieve his ambition of net zero, the NHS would collapse. Public transport systems would collapse. Housing would become much less affordable because there'd be much less construction. The economy, immigrants are not only in the short term doing
just to be clear, you mean net zero migration as opposed to net zero carbon?
I never thought he did.
I think that's a policy as well. So,
yes, exactly.
So if you literally, and he will throw around words like necessary in order to sort of.
Yes, but then what is necessary? Is a doctor or a nurse in the NHS? Is someone in a care home? Is someone working? And if we want to keep our great universities great, we have to have foreign students as well. So, what is necessary and how do we do that? But I think the other point about this is that it's not only the short-term work, it's the dynamism. So migrants are much more likely to start new businesses. Something like 40% of the startups in the UK, the patents, the new innovations in the US, well over half the founders of the big new companies are immigrant. So it's the dynamism going forward. And we want to improve growth. We want to improve productivity in the UK. We're going to have foreigners as part of the solution.
I love this series, The Shortest History, because you come away with it much better equipped than you went into it. This is the shortest history of Germany, perhaps. People may have read, but your book, The Shortest History of Migration, does deliver what it does, but you suffer from something I suffer from a bit as well, is that the people who really need to read it are the ones that are least likely to, aren't they?
Well, I did another book on migration about 10 years ago, Exceptional People. The subtitle is How Migration Shaped Our World and Will Define Our Future. It was published by Princeton University Press. Very few people read it. So this is my attempt to reach it. And I think I've had great success because I've gone onto your show.
Well, I hope we push people towards it.
I'm certainly more success than I had last time round.
Well, I can only apologise. Blame the Princeton University press office. Final question. How dismayed are you, and I know you write about it, about the successful conflation, and you have to conclude a deliberate conflation of economic migrants and refugees, genuine refugees.
I think it's a tragedy. Yeah. Over 60,000 people have died in the last 10 years trying to cross borders in the Channel, in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. I think, as you've said previously, there's a legal framework for refugees, people that are in legitimate fear of their lives or persecution. This is very clear in international law. And we need to distinguish very clearly the ethical, legal, moral responsibility we have to accept refugees and give them safe passage, and economic migrants where we do have the choice, and I think it is the right that governments have the choice. I'm absolutely comfortable with that debate. Let's have the debate on economic migrants, but we need to accept that what's happening on refugees and the conflation is a tragedy and it's a complete travesty of international law.
I didn't do this at the beginning of the interview because I didn't want to embarrass you, but I've interviewed quite a few authors over the years and quite a few biographical notes, but this one jumped out, I think, and merits repetition on air. Ian Goldin served as an advisor to President Nelson Mandela and has been knighted by the French government. That's not a bad little double, is it? And it's
it was a dream come true, and it's a story of a refugee going back. Wow. To contribute to the country, because I was involved in anti-apartheid. I left South Africa. I was working in Paris. In fact, when he was released from the prisons, he had spent 27 years. And he came to Paris, he invited me to go back, be his economic advisor and run the state bank, which I did. But that, it's a story which is related to the brain drain question of the circular migration and being able to contribute back home.
And you brought it in bang on 12 noon as well. You're a natural, Ian Goldin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's an absolute pleasure. The Shortest History of Migration is out now. And the day job, I should remind you, involves being Professor of Globalisation and Development at the University of Oxford. Not only must you read it yourself, but I bet you can think of some people who would benefit from reading it as well. The time now is 12 noon. It is 3 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I want to do this next topic and I'm not currently sure how it's going to work. I know that there is a lot of it about. The phrase that is used, and this will give some people listening a very large heads up on exactly where we're going next. So just moving away from the politics, picking up on some news that has broken in the course of today's programme. Walter Mitty. It's a phrase that military veterans in particular have attached a certain meaning to. I think in America, the phrase false valour is more common, and it involves people who lie and or exaggerate their military service. And it is in the news today because a chief constable, no less, the chief constable of Northamptonshire Police, has been suspended for lying and exaggerating his naval rank, length of service and achievements. He claimed he'd reached the rank of lieutenant in the military and that he was a military negotiator in Haiti in the 1980s. And it turns out that he was not. He also was photographed repeatedly wearing medals that he had not earned. He was suspended last October when these allegations emerged. He is now being dismissed without notice. 32 years as a police officer, coming to a juddering halt, in part because he wore a medal that was only issued to Falklands veterans. And at the time of the Falklands War, this chap would have been 15 years old. There's also, that's called the South Atlantic Medal. He claimed it was gifted from his older brother, but that was proved to be bogus when it was shown he had not applied for it until October 2023. I mean, he essentially, as the prosecution contested, he kind of lied. He tried to lie his way out of lies. It was a member of the public that contacted the then Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Stephen Mould, to complain about Mr. Adderley's wearing of medals and military service record. And that's the bit, that's one of the bits that intrigues me most, because ex-military are infuriated to the point of apoplexy by this kind of thing. And stolen valour is the phrase that we're looking for, apparently. It's a good one, isn't it? Stolen valour has an emotional ring to it as well, which reaches places that Walter Mitty doesn't reach, because there is a sense of theft of honour from the people who have actually done these things and made these sacrifices and run these risks. So I want you to tell me, if you're in this world, whether or not you've ever come across it and what you've done. I mean, we'll have to be a little bit careful legally, so don't mention any names. But I want you to talk to me about your unmasking of Walter Mitty's, because there are groups, I know there are, and there are people who are dedicated to this kind of thing. But then there's two other things I want to do as well. You've got, because psychologically there's something going on here that is not easy to understand. Why would anybody do this? That's easy to understand, right? It's because they want to accrue respect and admiration that they have not done anything to earn. But you would then conclude that it's only the kind of thing that would be done by someone a bit soft in the head, to put it, a little bit politically incorrectly, a phrase we used to use a lot. Someone who wasn't really thinking straight, or someone who was a bit daft. I mean, how on earth? But this man had risen through the ranks of the police force to become an actual chief constable, and yet somehow the siren lure of presenting himself as something he was not was so irresistible that he jeopardized his entire career and reputation when he didn't, if you like, have to. He would have been a respected... That's what I'm trying to say. Somebody who has no respect, somebody who has no status, somebody who has achieved nothing in life. I can completely understand how they might end up lying about military service in the hope of accruing some false valour. They are stealing somebody else's valour, but their own valour is false. So I get that. If you've got nothing going on, right, then you could be attracted to the idea of fake status or bogus reputation. But why would somebody who had plenty of status and a highly esteemed reputation behave in this way? Hit the numbers now. You will get through a little bit of amateur psychology on a Friday afternoon. What's not to like? 0345 6060 973. I don't think the police have got particular questions to answer, because judging someone's suitability to be a police officer doesn't really involve going over every anecdote they've ever told, or every medal, every non-police medal that they've ever been photographed wearing. That some of the detail from the hearing, the misconduct hearing, is breathtaking, and they can't quite believe what he did. When he talks about, the prosecutor talk about his audacity, to describe his audacity to be quite staggering. He'd lied over many, many years with arrogant temerity. They're looking at other matters now, so the case is still live in some ways, looking at misconduct in public office and fraud by false representation. We don't need to go there until those matters are complete. But this gross misconduct hearing has reached absolutely crucial conclusion that a chief constable lied and exaggerated his naval rank, length of service and achievements, up to and including wearing medals that he was not entitled to wear. So why would a high status individual do this? I like that question a lot. I also quite like the phrase high status individual. But it narrows us down, doesn't it? It filters out people who are a bit ashamed of what they are, a bit ashamed of who they are. If you're a high status individual, why would you do this? 0345 6060 973. And if you've got personal experience of it, I just want to hear your story. I'm not going to insist you provide us with any amateur psychology or insights into what you think was going on in the mind of the person that you busted. What I want you to do is talk to me about what you encountered, and especially, so I know it goes on a lot, and so some people listening will have loads of stories, but I'm interested in all of them. But when you first discovered that this phenomenon existed, what did it do to you as a veteran? What is the peculiar psychological process that you go through when you find out or when you encounter someone seeking to steal your valour? That's a much better phrase, isn't it, than Walter Mitty. Walter Mitty, of course, refers to a famous story of a very ordinary, sort of middle-brow man who spent his entire life constructing magnificent fantasies in his head in which he was always the hero. And that's going to be part of the answer to the question. But I'm fascinated by, A, why a high-status individual would do it, and B, by how widespread it is. And I guess the best way to address the question of how widespread it is by talking about people who've encountered it, talking to people who have come across it. The number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I'm going to read you something because it plays into my question about high status. And again, as I often mention to you on the programme, I've got no way to... I've got an idiot's corner there, quickly. Let me just grab that. There we go. I've got no way of establishing whether or not this is completely true, but I've also got no reason whatsoever to suspect that it might not be. This, I think, comes from a former colleague who says Nick's behaviour is completely beyond reason. As you say, he was genuinely one of the most respected police officers in the UK, not just the rank, but as a constable. He was leading the division when Dale Cregan killed 2 of his officers at Greater Manchester Police. He slept in his car in his office rather than going home until Cregan had been found. He left GMP after knocking heads with the then useless... I won't read the next bit out, Kev. I'll take your word for it, but I don't know that I'd be able to back that one up. During his time at Northampton, he's been a game changer. He's known for his ideas and his straight talking across the police community. I'm absolutely amazed. I love it when that happens, when someone who's listening to the programme can provide us with immediate context and insight into why a story is so staggering. Because this is not the kind of person you would expect to engage in that sort of behaviour. He has offered his own apologies, saying that the hurt I have caused to veterans of the armed forces was one of the most painful aspects of the case, because I come from a very proud family of veterans. And that, in a way, is the other question. Why does it hurt so much? Given that his lies in no way minimise your service or your sacrifice, why do these acts of stolen valour, these examples of Walter Mitty behaviour, why do they hurt? Why do they rankle just so much? We'll get stuck into all of that after this. It is 12:16. Ian Goldin, who made quite an impression on you, judging by the messages coming in response to that interview with him, and the quick heads up about his magnificent new book, The Shortest History of Migration, of course, mentioned Windrush. And we return to Windrush-related territory shortly in the programme with news of a new play that is opening at the Watford Palace Theatre, and also news I should probably have brought you yesterday of a conclusion to that case that Amelia Gentleman was telling us about a couple of weeks ago, looking into whether or not Suella Braverman had behaved unlawfully in some of her treatment of or behaviour towards the Windrush victims. So that's on the way before 1. Until then, matters military, stolen valour. It hurts so much, writes Steve, because no one, and I mean no one, knows what it was like at the front line of service, which was later recognised with a medal. So thank you for that, Steve. And when you've come across it yourself, face to face, that must be mad. John's in Oakley. John, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
Hello, John.
I'm a military veteran. I've done 8 years in a parachute regiment. I was in a hospital for a surgery on my shoulder.
Yeah.
When I was in between medication, I thought I'd get the bus into town.
Yeah.
There was a guy at the bus stop. He had his leg missing. He'd obviously been amputated at some point. I got chatting to him, and I said, "Oh, if you don't mind me asking, how did you lose your leg?" He said, "Oh, I lost it in the war in Afghanistan." And I said, "Oh my gosh, it must have been really terrible." I said, "What battalion was you in?" He said, "Parachute regiment." I said,
boy.
Wow, I'm in the parachute regiment.
This is his worst. This is his worst nightmare, isn't it?
Which battalion? Which company? It was quite a while ago. I don't really remember, and I couldn't lay into the guy he's got his leg missing.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what to say, and it's stuck with me ever since. And I've had a few sort of, Waltz sort of talk to me in the past, and
Waltz, that's it. Waltz is what you call them.
Yeah,
but you'd never come up.
Legends, and and you do get people embellish things, but that was particularly just such an awkward situation. I didn't really know what to say, and I don't really know what he gets out of it.
I do.
A couple of my pals have genuinely lost limbs in Afghanistan on Herrick 13. A guy called Pat, and I remember he was staying at a hotel, and he got talking to a guy in the elevator, and he told me about it. He got talking to a guy in the elevator. He went down, had his meal in the hotel. His meal had all been paid for him by this gentleman.
Oh yeah,
and he with a message, "Thanks for your service." So I don't know if there is a financial gain to a lot of people. I mean, because he didn't ask for the money, but someone went out of their way to do a really nice thing for
but they might get a bit of that. But I just think that most people would be impressed, and they wouldn't have the knowledge to ask the questions which to you are fairly straightforward and innocuous.
Roulette, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is.
A lot more sort of angrier people than me.
He could have got himself into some right old bother, couldn't he, with that? So what did you do? Did you just sort of change the subject or let it slide? Because he knew that you knew, didn't he? In that moment,
he knew I knew.
Yeah.
I knew that
you knew that he knew that you knew.
I was just
it's
and then
just horrible.
Walked away and got on the other side of the bus. It was just horrible.
Do you know what you reminded me of then? Do you remember when Donald Trump was being interviewed about the Bible by some Christian sort of evangelists, and they asked him what his favourite bit of the Bible was? Do you remember?
All of them. Yeah.
And he said all of them. I thought that's what your man was going to say. What battalion were you in? What troop were you in? I said, all of them. That's what I thought. Yeah, and that's another fantasist, albeit in an entirely different context.
Answer. Yeah.
All of them. Oh, I love that, John. Thank you. And I mean, would it be fair to say that people who had, in my experience, and I've got a few mates who've served, it's not the older generation thing that we were talking about on the anniversary of D-Day. People do talk about their service. They are able to talk about it, but they don't boast about it. And so you could probably get a bit of an alarm bell going off if someone was a little bit too in your face about the service or not.
I think so. I mean, it's quite handy for times like this because I can actually contribute to the conversation.
Yes.
But I don't think anyone.
You're not putting your hand up in polite company saying, "Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about this."
Yeah. I mean, but that's a personality thing. I mean, there is a lot of people. You call them army barmy. They're a bit. Yeah, well, you wouldn't call them army barmy, but I can call them army barmy, and they live and die with you wake up in the morning, everything's military.
And you can understand why, but they have at least done the things that they talk about.
Exactly.
So it's a different world entirely to a waltz. John, top man, thank you. God, imagine that. I just as someone who loves stories, immediately thinking about what's going through the mind of the liar in that case when he's obviously got it off pat that he lost his leg in Afghanistan, and then rolls the dice on what regiment he claims he was in, and then all of whatever the opposite of all your melons coming up on a fruit machine is. They've all the worst things imaginable have lined up in a row because he's got John standing in front of him asking him questions. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. Another John in Glasgow this time. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
how are you?
Very well.
Nobody asks you that.
Well, I know. I think they work on the presumption that I'm all right, but it's nice that you took the time, John. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for asking.
Good man. What's on your mind?
I was a police officer in Scotland for 18 years, and there's a lot of this goes on in the police.
Oh, really?
People that, yeah. So, and I don't know whether it's envy because other people's stories are better than yours.
Yeah.
Or you're constantly comparing yourself to, I'm not as tough as that guy, I've not had the same experience as he has. I worked in, the last part of my service, I worked in covert roles, so did surveillance. I briefly did a stint in undercover work, and the covert arena is full of people like that.
Right.
I mean, yeah, just real Walter Mitty characters. I remember once speaking to a senior officer who had, and I'll be careful with the details of this, he had represented that he had gone to Europe on an undercover job to buy a submachine gun.
Yeah.
And he told the story as if it was him that had done it. And he told the story in front of the guy who had actually done it.
Oh, no.
Who just kind of, and he just kind of smiled and went, yeah, cool.
So it was on the grapevine, as it were, this mission. And he'd heard it and then just nicked it and passed it off as his own and not realised
he was there. He was there.
I know. But he didn't. He didn't blow the whistle. He didn't blow the. It didn't say, "Hang on, mate, that was me."
No. But the officer who was passing it off as his own, he had been involved in the operation, but was not the undercover operator.
You surprise me. But the more I think about it, perhaps the less surprised I should be, because you're describing people who are already in covert roles. They're already undercover or working in surveillance. So they're not. It's a bit like the story that has launched this conversation. I would have expected the culprits to all have done nothing, to be working as, working in a crumpet factory or something, not to actually be in the world that they're in and then exaggerating what they've done in that actual world.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this with that senior, the chief constable who's been fired, is that he could have risen through those ranks, mainly doing administrative roles, because that's possible. That career path is really possible. So a non-operational police service.
I've heard that. Well, he was very. I don't know if you heard the message I read out from a former colleague describing what he did when Dale Cregan had killed two officers two of his officers in Greater Manchester. I don't think that is the case here. I think he seems to enjoy a great respect from some of his former colleagues, which is why the levels of shock surrounding what's happened are so high.
Yeah.
But I take your point. But as your story proves, you could be in that world and still lying about it. Thank you, John. Good Lord. And Declan says, you better watch out that there are no Waltz phoning in, James. And you'd need some front, wouldn't you, to try that. But I'm supremely confident that we haven't had that problem so far, and I'm pretty confident we won't be having it moving forward. So I go to Kevin in Rochford, and he tells me what his service was, and I'd have to then go, oh yeah, prove it. I don't think that would help anybody. Kevin, what made you pick up the phone?
Thank you for taking my call, James, off the programme.
Thank you, mate.
I served on HMS Rill from 1980 to 1983.
Yeah.
We left Portsmouth in late May, early June 1982, and we only went down as Ascension Island Guardship. Right. So of the 8,000 miles between UK and the Falklands, we covered 4,000 miles of it, and we spent about 2.5 months off Ascension Island.
Right.
Now, we found out on board, or it was broadcast to us, that if we stayed in that 4,000 mile zone, for a certain amount of days, we would qualify for the South Atlantic Medal without a rosette. Now, I'm probably the opposite of this guy, and my shipmates would call into that category, because if I recall correctly, we had a vote on board. I mean, we had a crew of 235, and I think only 3 people voted to stay. The rest of us, with obviously the circumstances and what people were going through 4,000 miles further south of us, it was nothing compared to what we were doing. So the captain took the ship out of the qualifying zone so that we didn't get the medal.
Good grief.
So when
is it wrong? Is it wrong to feel a bit sorry for the 3 people that really wanted the medal?
We never knew who they were or whatever.
Secret ballot.
But we did try and find out. But we sort of. Because I live in, obviously, the eastern area of, I'm sorry to say this, the BBC region, and they've been covering the story. And I sort of took the view that, I work in a commercial world, and you meet people of sort of dignitaries and etc. And this guy has gone out to public engagements. He's borne that medal, lived that, and like I say, on the back of what people were contributing, both in effort, sweat, time away from home, let alone injuries and death.
Yeah.
I just think what this guy's done is totally unforgivable. And I just can't sum up my anger when it came up, and he deserves everything that he's getting that comes to him and more.
Can you conceive of what he was playing at? What I mean, do you think it probably started small and escalated, or?
Yeah, you've got to. Well, from my part, I can only speak for me, obviously, but you've got to sort of sit there and say it's personal kudos.
Yes.
It's another. Because obviously the police do get sort of decorations, etc., and quite rightly so. As you say many times, when people run away from danger, they are one of the groups of people that run towards it, and quite rightly, this is reflected and acknowledged in the way of medals in some cases. Yeah. And you sit there and think, if a guy's got a bunch of medals, you're not going to question, are you? No one's going to know what they are. I mean, I was born quite late in life to my parents, so my father fought on D-Day. D+3, but he had the 4 war medals, but he got a rosette for serving on one of them, and I never knew when I was little, when I looked at the bar on it, I never knew what the bar meant, etc. And no one else is going to know what it is. You might know what the medal is, you might know or you might not know, depending on your interest level, what the rosette is. But the rosette actually means you served and fought.
Yeah.
And that for me is a bigger lie, because, as I say, compared to what people went through, to try and live on the back of that, that's disgusting.
You are, yeah. I do get it, and that's why some people go to so much trouble. So some people who speak, if you like, fluent medal, they know exactly what everything means. That there's Facebook groups, isn't there? And there are people constantly trying to work out. You see someone collecting for charity with a chest full of medals, and it's sad that there's a temptation to check, but stories like this remind us why there is.
Absolutely, yeah. As I say, so and a real shock that.
You could rise through the ranks of the police.
It's an organisation, not just a rank that someone held in that organisation, but it's an organisation we should respect and appreciate, and it reduces that as well.
It does, and that is, I guess, anyone a little bit puzzled about why veterans go after these people with such vigour has had that cleared up, if nothing else, from the quality of the calls that we've taken so far. Kevin, thank you, mate, and thank you for the kind words at the beginning as well. 12:31 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Tim Humphrey is here now with your headlines. It is 12:33 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We spoke some time ago to a chap called Anthony Bryan. I don't know if you remember. British man of Jamaican descent who had lived in this country for over 50 years when he was wrongly detained and threatened with deportation as a consequence of what has subsequently been known as the Windrush scandal, threatened with deportation due to the Home Office's failure to recognise his legal status. I spoke to Anthony and his wife Janet back in 2021, and the story, the broader story, which also includes the experiences of his son Dijon, have been turned into a play, which is opening in Watford. And we'll be catching up with Anthony and indeed with Dijon in about 12 minutes' time. You won't want to miss that. It's an incredible story. Oh, no, we'll do it now, actually. We'll do it right now. I do apologise. No one tells me anything around here. Or at least when they do, I'm not paying attention. Anthony, it's great to see you. How are you?
I'm good.
Where are you?
I'm in Jamaica at the moment.
So that's nice. And I think Dijon is with you. We'll speak to him briefly. But what do we know what elements of the story, where does the play begin and end?
Well, as far as it begins the opening in Watford.
No, I mean the story. Which bit of your story does the play focus on?
Well, it focuses on the what I went through, the beginning and what I went through. They denied me British citizenship, and then tried to deport me. And it just the same as the movie Sitting in Limbo.
Yes.
They're following the same story as Sitting in Limbo.
And
they arrest me, they put me in detention, gave me a ticket to come to Jamaica, although I didn't know Jamaica at the time because I left at 9 years old. And they just followed the story of Sitting in Limbo as the story of Sitting in Limbo.
Have you found it helpful? I mean, Sitting in Limbo did amazing business, won a BAFTA. It's now, as you say, been adapted for the stage. Have you found what was it like watching the story, which you're both in and as a viewer, in one sense, not in at the same time? How did it affect you emotionally?
Well, it did affect me in the sense that I always thought I was British. Until Home Office came involved and told me, well, I'm not British, and they wanted to deport me. But it was a bittersweet kind of thing because it was distressing that in the fact that they wanted to get me out of the country where I thought it was my country. Really, I still love England, but I don't like the Home Office.
I think that's reasonable. What I'm interested in, because when we watch it, we can't quite believe it. But when you watch it, you're watching you. So, I mean, were there moments? This is a really silly question, Anthony. So forgive me in advance. But were there moments watching your own story where you struggled to believe that this had actually happened to someone, even though you knew it had happened to you?
Well, that is true. Because although I was watching the story, I couldn't believe that was my story. That's what I went through.
Yeah.
Until I saw on the screen itself. Then it dropped. The pin dropped. Or whatever.
And they've done a good job, have they? You're pleased with how I know you won't have seen the play yet, but you were very pleased with how the film portrayed events.
I was pleased the way the film went. Obviously, some of it was fiction, whatever, but the majority of it was true. Right?
Poetic license, I think they call it. And of course, 164 members of that generation were wrongly deported. So the story has ramifications and continues to resonate long beyond your own experiences. And indeed,
that's correct.
In one way, it continues to resonate within your own family, because I know Dijon is visiting you in Jamaica at the moment, and I'll speak to Dijon now, because the reason why you're visiting your father is part of the unfolding and continuing scandal, I think, Dijon.
Yes. Hello there, James. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, precisely. I'm okay. Basically, the reason why I'm out here visiting my dad is because my dad wasn't fit to travel. And I guess this is what we keep missing. The Home Office requested that a DNA test needed to be taken by me and my dad to prove that he is my dad. My dad is unwell and cannot travel back to the UK at the moment, which is why I've now come here to visit him.
So the DNA test is to establish his credentials rather than yours?
Well, it's to prove that I am his child, yes.
And why does that need to be proved? Forgive me.
Well, so basically, they said that, so we've put in a claim for compensation, and they said that I have to prove that my dad is my dad. One of the ways they said I could prove it is if I could track down the midwife that was present at my birth. Another way they said if I could find what do they call it? You know, the doctor's appointments that you have before you give birth.
Yeah, prenatal.
So, the prenatal, antenatal clinics. If we could find one of the nurses to remember my dad.
I see. So this was to help you avoid having to go all the way back to Jamaica. They were trying to come. Anthony, did you not keep the details of the midwife who was there when Dijon was born? I mean, that's what all dads have got, the phone number of the midwife in their pocket.
I find that so ridiculous because if I knew in hindsight, then I probably would. But who keeps these things?
I know we can laugh now, and I mean, and I'm sorry to hear about your health issues. But Dijon, of course, we all know your dad's story. We know little bits of your story, but you were watching your dad being held in prison for reasons that made no sense, which is part of the reason why these applications have gone in.
No sense at all. So a quick joke. My dad's been in the country from 9 years old. He spent more than 50 years in the country. My dad's considered not British. I'm 40 years old now. I'm considered British. My dad's not considered British. My brothers are considered British. My dad's not considered British. For me, it was a slap in the face. What hurt me the most, my dad went through it. So, and he was obviously being detained. What hurt the family the most is seeing him behind bars for not being involved in any crime, just living his day-to-day life, you know. And then he was locked up, then released, then locked up again. The phone call that really hurt me the most is when my dad was inside and he called and just said, you know what, I'm just going to sign any paper that they put in front of me just to go home because I just don't want to be in prison anymore. And that's the part that hurts me the most, you know.
Of course it does. Of course it, and I've spoken to your dad about this before, but I haven't asked you. I presume that when it first happened, you thought it would be sorted in about an hour. You thought something, you know, this is such an obvious error.
Correct. So my thing is this. Like my dad's, like I said, my dad's been in England since 9 years old.
Yeah.
He's never left the country. So if somebody's been in the country for 50 years and then you're now telling them they have to go home, where is home, James? Just tell me that. Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
I even said to my dad, because I used to visit my grandma. My grandma's since passed now, but I used to visit my grandma, and I said to my dad, when I left Jamaica in 2007, the Burger King was on the left side of the road. And when I came back, it was on the right side of the road. And they didn't move the Burger King, they moved the road. So I said to my dad, if you haven't been in Jamaica in 50 years, I guarantee you, there's no way you're going to find where we used to live.
It's an amazing thing. And impossible, I think, and you wouldn't be the only person to conclude this, that there is a form of institutional racism in play from the Home Office on every single page of you and your family's story.
Well, I'm not going to say that there's racism. I would just say that some people just are looking the other way because the way I see it, it's just it's night and day. Like my dad's been, like I said, my dad's been there for 50 years. They won't accept they won't accept my birth certificate because they believe my birth certificate. Even though my dad's on my birth certificate, that's not enough evidence.
I mean, that last bit there is extraordinary. So they think either you faked it in order to lodge a claim or that it was faked when you were born for as yet unspecified reasons.
Definitely. Well, I don't know what to say for that.
No, I'm just trying to, Anthony, you've spent years trying to work out what on earth they were playing at while they were going through all this.
I knew this day will come, so I put my name on his register just in case we were going to do a conversation, you know, a claim.
Anthony, it's lovely to hear your laughter, and I will encourage people who are not already familiar with your story to both watch the film Sitting in Limbo, but also to watch the play The Windrush Scandal at the Watford Palace Theatre. Dijon, I mean, I just want to say sorry. I'm sorry for what you're going through, and I hope that it reaches a swift and happy conclusion. But of course, no one can ever take away the indignity of the hoops that you're being asked to jump through, can they?
Definitely. I've never questioned my father. I've never questioned my mum. My mum said my dad's my dad. My dad said my dad's my dad. But the Home Office has got me questioning if my dad's really my dad, which is just a joke. The one thing I would say to anybody, if you are going through this, there's a lot of people out there that's willing to help. Justice for Windrush definitely will help you out. They've been strong. They've always helped me, pushed me forward to let me keep going. So that's what I've been doing, James. At the end of the day, like I said, my dad's not well, which is the reason why I've come out here. Yeah. But I just want to say this: since I've done the show on a different news, the Home Office said that they no longer require me to do a DNA test. But I would state that they have not put that in writing. So, and my ticket was already booked by then. So I was going to do the DNA test anyway.
And it's nice to see your dad.
And it's nice to see my dad. But, my manager said to me, he's never heard a person come into the office to request holiday time to fly to Jamaica to do a DNA test to prove that his dad is in. His dad is really.
As I've already mentioned, I'm glad that we've all managed to smile throughout these conversations, but nobody is underestimating the seriousness and the offensive absurdity of what you, Anthony, were put through, the true horrors of what you were put
ridiculous.
Through. Yeah, and it's good to hear you sounding well. I hope your condition improves. I really do. It's nice to speak to you both, and thank you. Do let us know about the developments on that, the DNA test that was and then wasn't needed to prove that your dad's your dad. And on it goes. Makes it perhaps less surprising. Anthony Dijon, thank you. Less surprising to also report some news from this week where a decision by the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman to drop 2 recommendations intended to repair some of the harm done to the Windrush generation was unlawful. I'm going to read that to you again because I want you to have the words of Anthony and the words of Dijon in your mind as I read this sentence about our country in 2024. Okay, so that's Anthony's story. 50 years here. That's Dijon's 50 years here, locked up under threat of deportation. That's Dijon's story, even now compelled to fly to Jamaica to get a DNA test from his poorly father. And Suella Braverman dropped 2 recommendations intended to repair some of the harm done to the Windrush generation. That's bad enough, but the High Court has now found that was unlawful. Suella Braverman's name often mentioned in the context of conversations about who might be the next leader of the Tory party. It is 10 minutes to 1. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. One or hopefully 2 or so more calls about the Waltz, the Walter-Mitties who fake or exaggerate or lie about military service or public service, actually, because the undercover cop who had a similar story to tell was in exactly the same space. And also a reminder of that American phrase, stolen valor, to describe it, which speaks better to the sense of injustice and the sense of theft that genuine veterans feel. Just a quick nod back towards that conversation with Anthony and Dijon. Catherine saw the play on Wednesday, saw the Windrush play Sitting in Limbo on Wednesday at Watford Palace Theatre. It was an incredible performance that received a standing ovation. Tomorrow, of course, is Windrush Day, and that will be part of the reason why Simon has asked me to tell you that there's a Windrush generation reunion being held at the London Bus Museum in Brooklands, Weybridge, on Sunday as part of their big summer event. Please, James, I know it's an advertisement, but could you mention this? Could you give us a shout out? My pleasure, actually, Simon. My pleasure entirely. Back to the waltz, as it were. Steve's in West Row in Suffolk. Steve, what can you tell us?
Hello, James.
Hello, Steve.
First time caller, long time listener. I'm bricking it, mate. I'm telling you, I'm proper bricking it.
Given what I already know, I already know about what you've done in your life. The idea that you find this nerve-wracking is frankly ridiculous. Get on with it, man.
I've got a few theories behind why this fella's done it. A little bit of background on me. I've done a little stint as a prison officer in London, and then I come out of there, and then I I luckily got into close protection for about 10 years. And we used to see these sort of fellas all the time. I think sometimes they felt very intimidated by what sort of job they were walking into.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it was like a psychological cloak they'd sort of wear around themselves to sort of say that I'm this character and I'm going to act like that character, to big themselves up.
Yeah.
But also it had me chuckling as well, thinking of that guy off in the office, the
Gareth.
one.
Gareth.
Yeah, with his gun belt round his shoulder with his mobile phone in it. They're the sort of characters that we used to have. They'd put the radio clip into the bottom of the radio like they were putting a magazine in the bottom of a gun, and
there's a thin line. I mean, I get the point at which it ceases to be ridiculous and becomes offensive is interesting as well, isn't it? Because this police officer has obviously crossed that line. I never found Gareth in the office offensive. I always found him entirely ridiculous. It's when we move into the area where it feels like they are stealing the honour or the reputation of the people that have actually done these things. I think that's when it changes.
Yeah, that's right. You'd have, I mean, there were guys that had come out of 2-2,
right,
or had been bootnecks at Marines and stuff like that really knew their onions, and they knew their stuff. And then you'd have these guys that were insinuating that they had been part of that.
Oh,
but
I could tell you some stories that I could tell. I've seen some things in my time. We go, oh yeah, what's that then? What's that? What have you seen?
Basically, basically, like one of this had insinuated that he was part of 2-2,
right?
But it later turned out that it was in the army, but he was part of a signal squadron that was attached to it and didn't get to go on the Gucci part of the mission.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Gucci part of the mission. Steve, thank you. I love that. There's nothing to be nervous about. You've got a very infectious laugh. But again, it's evidence of people who've done a bit of this, but were desperate to portray themselves as having done more. So I came at this backwards. I'd always presumed it would be people like Gareth making it up completely, as opposed to people like the ones that almost all our callers have told about, except the fella in the bus shelter at the very beginning, who've done, and like this police officer, who've done quite a lot to be proud of, but have not done anything like the things that they claim that they've done. It is full disclosure time, and this week's is lovely. It's also particularly pertinent. This is one of the rare occasions where the radio show and the podcast cross over quite perfectly, because we were talking about class and culture only a couple of weeks ago when Sally Lindsay, the legend that is Sally Lindsay, rang in. You will know her from Mount Pleasant, the Madame Blanc mysteries. You'll know her from Coronation Street, I suppose, but first came to the public attention playing Twiggy's girlfriend in the royal family, and she's done it all, and now writes and produces and creates, and she has a wonderful story. Beginning her showbiz debut is the stuff of legend. I'm not going to spoil it by telling you what it is, but if you watched Top of the Pops as a child in the early 1980s, probably late 70s, early 80s, and you don't know why that is relevant to Sally Lindsay, you're in for a lovely surprise when you actually listen to Full Disclosure. But here is a little flavour of her view on something I completely agree with, which is the snobbery surrounding soap operas in this country, even from an acting point of view, when in fact the work that's done on them is as good as anything you'll see in a Hollywood blockbuster.
What people don't understand about returning dramas, they call them nowadays, don't they? But you literally have to rely on how raw you are as an artist.
Yes.
You have no time at all. So there's no sort of sitting deliberating. One of my best friends is Saran Jones, and we talk about this all the time, that we're out the traps when we go on set. We're out the traps. We always finish early because of that, because we don't sit and ponder our existence.
Right. Yeah.
It's done, and it's from there, because it's a raw thing. And any actor that's worked on a soap, I will hire an actor that's worked on a soap over someone else, and that's a horrible thing to say, but I will.
It's not. It's like saying someone who did rep in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly. We won't. You get any messing out of them. They turn up, they know the lines, they're on it, and it's because of this rawness they've got, and it's such a talent. There's so many people went through Coronation Street and thought it was beneath them, and then they were gone. within weeks.
How interesting.
And
So they turn up with an attitude.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting.
You know, oh, can't believe her in Manchester. It's awful, isn't it? And then they do that comedy, like, you know, northern accent that people put on.
Whereas authenticity is what delivers the moments that the audience want. And it's not just the actors; it's the writers, it's the directors.
Absolutely.
I mean, the craft and the talent involved in doing a show like that is off the. Why is it? Is it because private schools have dominated drama for so long, or the London drama schools, so they just think this is some sort of end of peer entertainment?
Absolutely. I mean, and also
there's
that stat that 50% of soap writers are women. When it gets to mainstream television, which I love, it's 14%, James.
Is it really?
Yeah, and that's horrific. And it's because this bloke doesn't know this bloke and didn't go to that school. And I remember when the Oxford and Cambridge boys tried to write an ep of Coronation Street, and God love them. And they'd write in this sort of strange sort of vernacular that even my granddad didn't. Well, I don't even think anybody ever did.
Ever. No one ever spoke.
Goes to the foot of our stairs. And there was one time I remember Cy Gregson. He won't mind me saying. We were told to stick to the script.
Yeah.
So he did.
Right.
Because he had a photographic memory, so he could stick to the script. And it was so ridiculous that they had to go again.
I don't know why I enjoyed that so much. Partly because Sally's so lovely, and because the story she had to tell resonated with me across all areas of my life. Cy Gregson, for those of you who don't know, is, of course, the actor who plays Steve MacDonald on Now. So I still think of him as a kid, but I still think of myself as a kid. But I suppose he must be one of the longest-serving members of the Coronation Street cast. So apologies to everyone. We'll come back to that topic, won't we? I mean, for a start next week, we're going to find out more about the actual case that we were discussing with the former Chief Constable of Northamptonshire being found to have lied about military service, because I feel we could have done loads more. But that is it from me. I just give you a quick heads up. Sitting in Limbo is still available on iPlayer if you want to watch the dramatised version of what happened to Anthony Bryan, our guest earlier, and his family. But if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for